What's up, everyone? We are live. Cool, let me just check and make sure things are going okay. Okay. Cool, so welcome to the very first live stream of this channel. Recently, a friend sent me this video that you may or may not have seen on YouTube called Lines Go Up, the Problem with NFTs. It talks a lot about NFTs, but in general, is kind of a critique of crypto overall. And it has over almost 5 million views in just a few weeks, which is pretty crazy. And I started watching the video and I realized that there were a ton of things that I had issues with, but also a ton of things I agreed with. And I realized that if you don't understand kind of some of the technical workings about crypto, it's hard to know which things might be exaggerated or biased and which things might be spot on watching this video. So my goal with this stream is to go through the video and give some live rebuttals to some of the points that he makes. And I actually haven't even seen the whole video yet. I watched about 45 minutes into it and then I stopped watching because I wanted to do this live. So let's go ahead and get into it. It's a super high production quality video, which is cool.
Content creators, the unavoidable subject of 2021 has been NFTs.
And before we get into it, let me know if there are volume issues or anything like that. Let me know if the volume's okay.
From incredibly cringeworthy ape profile pics to incomprehensibly tasteless tributes to deceased celebrities to six-figure sales of the original copy of a meme, it is the thing that is currently dominating the collective brain space of digital artists and sucking up all the oxygen in the room. And I do want to talk about that. I want to talk about my opinions on NFTs and digital ownership and scarcity and all the myriad dimensions of the issue, but I don't just want to talk about NFTs. I can't just talk about NFTs because ultimately...
So basically what he's going to say is that he has to talk about crypto as a whole and crypto, etc. And then there's this section at the beginning on the financial collapse of 2008. But the actual good crypto stuff starts right here. So let's go ahead and just skip to that. Bitcoin.
This naked display of greed and fraud created what would be fertile soil for both anti-capitalist movements and hyper-capitalist movements, both groups of people who saw themselves as being screwed over by the system, with one group diagnosing the problem as the system's inherently corrupt and corrupting incentives, and the other seeing the crisis as a consequence of too much regulation, too much exclusion. The hyper-capitalist or...
So already he's kind of polarizing people's responses to the financial crisis in 2008 as people who think that anti-capitalist versus hyper-capitalist, people that think there was not enough regulation or like extremely not enough regulation, and people that think that there should have been no regulation and that would have somehow prevented this. I don't necessarily agree in this polarization right off the bat, because I probably fall somewhere in the middle where I definitely think that there should have been more government oversight. But I don't necessarily would consider myself an anti-capitalist. But let's just keep watching.
Capitalist argument is that in a less constrained market, there would be more incentive to call foul, that regulation had only succeeded in creating an in-group that was effectively able to conspire without competition. Of course, this argument fails to consider that a substantial number of people within the system did, in fact, get fabulously wealthy specifically by betting against the synthetic cess of the market, but regardless. Into this environment
Actually, that is a great book and great movie. And I encourage people, if you see something that's really like NFTs or something where you feel like there is a huge crazy excess, people are going crazy, it's just greed is driving everything, I would encourage you to look at ways that you can actually use that to benefit your own life. So if you really think that, for example, interest rates are going to go up like crazy, then find a way to hedge yourself against those interest rates. You know, don't just sit there and complain about it.
2009 arrived Bitcoin, an all-electronic peer-to-peer currency. Philosophically, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general was paraded as an end to banks and centralized currency. This is what will form the bedrock, both philosophical and
That part's pretty
technological,
true.
that NFTs will be built on top of. It's a bit of a hike from here to the Bored Ape Yacht Club, so I guess get ready for that. Strap in. As we get into this, we're going to have to deal with a lot of vocabulary, need to deal with a lot of complexity. Some
I'm
of
gonna
this
turn
is
on
the
the
result of
subtitles
systems
real
that are
quick.
very technically intricate, and some of this is from systems that are poorly designed or deliberately obtuse in order to make them difficult to understand and thus appear more legitimate. The entire subject sits at the intersection of two fields that are notoriously prone to hype-based obfuscation, computer tech and finance, and inherits a lot of bad habits from both, with a reputation for making things deliberately more difficult to understand, specifically to create the illusion that only they are smart enough to understand.
This is actually spot on, and this is a huge problem in crypto, where a lot of the, especially more nefarious projects, have what I call obfuscation through complexity, where basically they're making things so complicated that it sounds good, but you don't really understand it, so it's hard to actually see what's happening. And this is how some of the Ponzi schemes I've covered in past videos, this is how a lot of them actually work, is they kind of prey on people's um, not willingness, or they basically make things so complex that it would take an expert to spend a huge number of hours to actually be able to figure out where all the moving pieces come together. So yeah, spot on that point.
Mining and minting are both methods of making tokens, which are the base thing that blockchains deal with, but the two are colloquially different processes, where mining is a coin token created as a result of the consensus protocol, and minting is user-initiated addition of a token to a blockchain. All blockchains are made of nodes, and these nodes can be watcher nodes, miner nodes, or validator nodes, though most miner nodes are also validator nodes. Fractionalization is the process of taking one asset and creating a new asset that represents portions of the original.
So one thing that I kind of feel like he's doing here is exactly what he just talked about, is he's basically saying a bunch of different words, complex blockchain words, where if you're deep into it, you've probably understood all of it. But if this is your first time, or you just have kind of a tangential understanding of crypto, then like none of those words make sense. He was just kind of plucking them out, and so it kind of feels like he's saying like, "Oh, this is all very complex, so trust me, I'll be your guide," which is good in the sense that he's establishing authority for his video, but I think that people can't just blindly trust that he's going to explain everything properly to them, right? But it is obvious that he does know kind of like a decent amount of blockchain so far.
So you get DOG, a meme coin crypto DeFi venture capital fund backed by the fractionalization of the original Doge meme sold as an NFT to Pleaser DAO on the Ethereum network. I'm sorry, some of this is just gonna be like that. The idea behind cryptocurrency is that your digital wallet functions the same as a bank account. There's no need for a bank to hold and process your transactions, because rather than holding a sum that conceptually represents physical currency, the crypto coins in your crypto wallet are the actual money. And because this money isn't issued by a government, it is resistant to historical cash crises like hyperinflation caused.
One sec. I think I'm getting an audio issue. Sorry, bear with me. Let's see.
Caused by governments devaluing their currency.
One second. But in general, yeah, although I would say that there are crypto coins that do represent US dollars and government-backed money, and those are probably the most useful for transactions. But, okay, let's see. Is this working now?
On purpose or by accident.
Okay.
It brings the flexibility and anonymity of cash and barter to the digital realm, allowing individuals to transact without oversight or intermediaries. And in a one-paragraph pitch, you can see the appeal. There's a compelling narrative there. But, of course, in the 12 years since then, none of that played out as designed. Bitcoin was structurally too slow and expensive to handle regular commerce. The whole thing basically came out the gate as a speculative financial vehicle, and so the only consumer market that proved to be a viable use was buying and selling prohibited drugs, where the high fees, rapid price fluctuations, and multi-hour transaction times were mitigated by receiving LSD in the mail.
Okay, multi-hour transaction times is a little bit of a stretch, even with Bitcoin. Um, we'll see what he says, but blockchain has progressed a lot since then and actually accomplished some of those things. Let's see if he covers it, and if not, I'll let you know.
A week later. And as far as banking is concerned, Bitcoin was never designed to solve the actual problems created by the banking industry, only to be the new medium by which they operated. The principal offering wasn't revolution, but at best a changing of the guard. The gripe is not with the outcomes of 2008, but the fact that you had to be well connected in order to get in on the grift in 2006. And even the change of the guard is an illusion. Old money finance assholes like the Winklevoss twins were some of the first big names to jump onto crypto, where they remain to this day. Financial criminal Jordan Belfort, convicted of fraud for running pump and dump schemes and barred for life from trading regulated securities or acting as a broker, loves crypto. Venture capitalist Chris Dixon, who has made huge bank off the old web in his role as a general partner at VC firm Andreessen Horowitz.
So I think that it's worth mentioning that some of these people, it is true that the Winklevoss twins were early supporters of Bitcoin. And the reason they're billionaires is actually because they took their settlement from Facebook and put that into Bitcoin. But it seems like he's just kind of naming people that are loosely affiliated. Like Jordan Belfort is absolutely not a big player in the crypto landscape. Chris Dixon, if he's a really interesting person to listen to, whether or not you're okay with the fact that he made money through venture capital, I don't know, that's up to you, but he has some really interesting ideas on what cryptocurrency could enable. And a lot of those are positive ideas for the world. So it feels like he's just kind of going through people associated with crypto and using an ad hominem attack against those people to somehow attack crypto. So let's keep watching.
Horowitz is super popular in the NFT space. He likes to paint himself as an outsider underdog, fighting the gatekeepers, but he also sits on the boards of Coinbase, a large cryptocurrency exchange that makes money by being the gatekeeper, collecting a...
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's an underdog fighting the gatekeepers, but it is worth saying that he's on the board of Coinbase because he invested in Coinbase when they were just like one person, right? So it's not like him being on the board of $1 billion company. He's there because he caught Coinbase early, because he believed in it. So
fee on all entries and exits to the crypto economy, and Oculus VR, which is owned by Meta, nay Facebook. Peter Thiel, who also went from wealthy to ultra wealthy off the Web2 boom via PayPal, loves crypto and is friends with a bunch of eugenics advocates who promote cryptocurrency as a return to sound money for a whole bunch of extremely racist reasons, because when they start talking about banks and bankers, they mean Jews.
Again, Peter Thiel, most people in crypto might not even know who Peter Thiel is, but he definitely has very little influence, at least in the open, on the crypto space. And he talks about how he likes Bitcoin, but he's just one of millions of people who talk about that. So I'm not sure what bringing him into this video actually is doing.
Some of the largest institutional holders of cryptocurrency are the exact same investment banks that created the subprime loan crash. Rather than being a reprieve to the people harmed by the housing bubble, the people whose savings and retirements were unknown to them being gambled on smoke, cryptocurrency instantly became the new playground for smoke vendors. This is a really important point to stress. Cryptocurrency does nothing to address 99% of the problems with the banking industry, because those problems are patterns of human behavior. Their incentives, their social structures, their modalities. The problem is what people are doing to others, not that the building they're doing it in has the word bank on the outside.
So I think the idea that cryptocurrency alone and that blockchain technology alone will solve these problems, I think, yeah, it is a problem with human behavior. And as you can see, scams are rife in crypto land, right? There are probably more scams popping up than legitimate projects. But I don't think that stops crypto from having the possibility of fixing some of these problems. And I also think that saying that they haven't been able to fix 99% of the problems so far um, is not quite true, but let's keep watching.
In addition to not fixing problems, Bitcoin also came with a pretty substantial drawback. The innovation of Bitcoin over previous attempts at digital currency was to employ a distributed append-only ledger, a kind of database where new entries can only be added to the end, and then to have several different nodes called validators compete over who gets to validate the next update. These are, respectively, the blockchain and proof-of-work verification. Now, proof of work has an interesting history as a technology, typically being deployed as a deterrent to misbehavior. For example, if you require that every email sent, the user's computer has to compute a small math program. It places a trivial load onto normal users sending a few dozen or even a couple hundred emails a day, but places a massive load on the infrastructure of anyone attempting to spam millions of emails.
This is true.
How it works in Bitcoin, simply put, is that when a block of transactions are ready to be recorded to the ledger, all of the mining nodes in the network compete with one another to solve a cryptographic math problem that's based on the data inside the block. Effectively, they're competing to figure out the equation that yields a specific result when the contents of the block are fed into it, with the complexity of the desired result getting deliberately more difficult based on the total processing power available to the network. Once the math problem has been solved, the rest of the validation network can easily double-check the work, since the contents of the block can be fed into the proposed solution, and it either spits out the valid answer or fails. If the equation works and the consensus of validator signs off on it, the block is added to the bottom of the ledger, and the miner who solved the problem first is rewarded with newly generated Bitcoin.
It's obvious that they've done research, and I feel like that is a pretty decent explanation of proof of work.
The complexity of the answer that the computers are trying to solve scales up based on the network's processing power, specifically to incur heavy diminishing returns as a protection against an attack on the network where someone just builds a bigger computer and takes over. Critics pointed out that this created new problems. Adversarial validation would deliberately incur escalating processing costs, which would in turn generate perverse structural incentives that would quickly reward capital holders and lock out any individual that wasn't already obscenely wealthy, because while the escalating proof of work scheme incurs heavy diminishing returns are still returns. So more would always go to those with the resources to build the bigger rig. No matter what Bitcoin future was envisioned, in the here and now, computer hardware can be bought with dollars. Rather than dismantle...
Super true. And Gabe, to answer your question, we're just going over this recent viral video that's a big critique of crypto and calling out some of the things that I think were not necessarily accurate or presented in an unbiased way. But also, this guy got a lot of things right, so I'm trying to distinguish between those. And I actually haven't seen the entire video yet. So after about 45 minutes, I'll be watching it for the first time with you. But I have seen this part.
And corrupt power structures, this would just become a new tool for existing wealth. And that's exactly what happened. Thus began an arms race for bigger and bigger processing rigs, followed by escalating demands for the support systems, hardware engineers, HVAC, and operating space needed to put those rigs in. And don't worry, we're not forgetting the power requirements. These rigs draw an industrial amount of power, and...
So he's basically saying that now rich people are the ones who control Bitcoin mining, which is a valid critique. I think pretty quickly, Bitcoin mining went from something that you could do on your laptop to something where you really do, in order to be profitable, need access to super cheap electricity, economies of scale, etc.
Because of the winner-takes-all nature of the competition, huge amounts of redundant work are being done and discarded. Estimates for this power consumption are hard to verify. The data is very complex, spread across hundreds of operators around the globe who move frequently in search of cheap electricity, and it's all pretty heavily politicized. But even conservative estimates from within the crypto mining industry puts the sum energy cost of Bitcoin processing on par with the power consumption of a small industrialized nation. Now, evangelists will counter that the global banking industry also uses a lot of power, gesturing at things like idle ATMs humming away all night long, which is, strictly speaking, Not untrue. On a factual level, the entire global banking industry does, in fact, use a lot of total electricity. But for scale, it takes 6 hours of that sustained power draw for the Bitcoin network to process as many transactions.
So one thing he's saying is the big counter argument to Bitcoin's power use is that the banking industry uses a lot of power. I think that, okay, that's one counter argument, but I don't think that's the strongest one. I think some of the strongest counter arguments that I've seen are that Bitcoin, the power that Bitcoin is actually using, because it's directly related, your profit is directly related to how expensive the power is. Power is often used in places that the power would have been wasted otherwise. There's a really good book called The Grid. Let's see if I can pull it up. But basically, when you're using power, when you turn on a light bulb, the power is being generated at exactly the same time and going through the wire. It's like pushing, if you like boba tea, it's like pushing boba through a straw, right? In order, if you're generating power and it's going into the wire, it has to be coming out at the same time. The thing with a lot of renewable resources like wind or solar is you don't choose when those are producing power, right? It depends on the weather. And the weather doesn't match up with the consumption patterns of people. So if there's a windstorm in the middle of the day when no one's using power, then they literally have to either disconnect the wind turbines from the power like sources and just send that power generation directly into the ground. That's literally what happens. Or they have to find some kind of way to store it. So Bitcoin, because battery technology hasn't really caught up, Bitcoin could be a way for these renewable energy projects to actually make more money in those downtimes. So it could provide a financial floor to the power of their electricity. That's just one argument. But this is why you'll see Bitcoin, a lot of Bitcoin servers, Bitcoin mining centers are in places that are really cold and like where the power might be used or the heat generation by these things might actually be used to heat buildings, right? Like these kinds of things are happening, but don't get talked about too much. But let's see what he has to say about the banking versus Bitcoin.
Transactions as Visa handles in 1 minute. And during that time, Visa is using fractions of a cent of electricity per transaction. And that's just Visa. That's one major institution. So, like, yes, globally, the entirety of the banking industry consumes a lot of power, and a non-trivial portion.
So I don't think comparing to Visa is necessarily the best comparison, because if you were to compare a crypto project to a high transaction per second banking system like Visa, you wouldn't choose Bitcoin. Bitcoin originally may have been thought of as something that could be used for daily transactions, but quickly that hasn't really panned out. But there are a lot of cryptocurrencies, especially layer twos on Ethereum, or projects like Solana or Terra that have a similar transaction throughput and are also using a non-proof of work model. So maybe something like proof of stake, where their power consumption would be much more on par with Visa or cheaper.
Of that is waste that could be better allocated. But it's also the global banking industry for 7 billion people and not the hobby horse of a few 100,000 gambling addicts. So just to head all this off at the
a few 100,000, he's just kind of throwing in random jabs, right? Like Bitcoin is not, there are a lot more people that use it than a few 100,000 gambling addicts. And I think he'll get to some actual use cases later. But for some people, especially in the case of remittances where people are sending money back to family, it's a very important use case. So I don't like that he's dismissing
Bitcoin
that.
and proof of work cryptocurrency aren't incentivizing a move to green energy sources like solar and wind, they are offsetting it. Because electrical consumption, electrical waste, is the value that underpins Bitcoin. Miners spend X dollars in electricity to mine a Bitcoin. They expect to be able to sell that coin for at least X plus profit. When new power sources come online and the price of electricity goes down, they don't let X go down, they build a bigger machine.
Okay, there's an ad break. But yeah, I mean, in general, though, I think that the critiques of Bitcoin as proof of work, a lot of times they don't give the strong counter arguments, but um, yeah, it does use a lot of power, right? And there is an open debate about whether or not that's worth it. Ethereum, okay, this is going to be the fun one.
In 2012, Vitalik Buterin, a crypto enthusiast and butthurt warlock main, set out to fix what he saw as the failings and inflexibilities of Bitcoin. Rather than becoming the new digital currency, a thing that people actually use to buy stuff, Bitcoin had become an unwieldy speculative financial instrument, too slow and expensive to use for anything other than stunt purchases of expensive cars. It was infested with money laundering and mired in bad press. After the FBI shut down Silk Road, you couldn't even buy drugs with it anymore. In practice, you couldn't do anything with your Bitcoin but bet.
Actually, false. You can still buy drugs with crypto, but that's besides the point. Um, and yeah, some of these things about Bitcoin are correct, but also Bitcoin is still, I don't know, it talks about Bitcoin as a failed thing. Bitcoin's main use to now is as digital gold, where it is kind of a giant Ponzi scheme where you need everyone to believe in it, but at the same time, so are fiat monetary systems. This is the argument that a Bitcoin proponent would say. Um, with fiat, like with US dollars, they used to be backed up by gold, and now they're not backed up by anything. So a dollar is what we all believe a dollar is worth. Right now, as inflation is going up, we're believing a dollar is worth less, and so that makes a dollar worth less. So with Bitcoin, it's the same thing, where a Bitcoin is worth what people think it's worth, which, yeah, it's kind of like a giant Ponzi scheme. Um, but if El Salvador adopted Bitcoin, if a lot of other countries adopt Bitcoin, the benefit that Bitcoin has is that it's not um, inherently tied to the monetary policy of a select few elitist individuals. Like, and by elitist, I mean there are a small number of people that control the money supply of governments, and the vast majority of people aren't able to weigh in on those decisions, but their lives are directly affected, and in a lot of cases, affected more than the people that are actually making those decisions. So it's a very libertarian argument, but it is, I think, a argument for Bitcoin. And so saying that it's failed, it's actually lived up to that argument. And as we see inflation rising across the world now, it'll be interesting to see how Bitcoin actually does.
Bet on it. Lock up money you already have in the hopes that Bitcoin goes up later, and pray you don't lose it all in a scam, lose access to your wallet, or have it all stolen by an exchange. The result, launched in 2014, was Ethereum, a competing cryptocurrency that boasted lower fees, faster transaction times, a reduced electrical footprint, and most notably, a sophisticated processing functionality. While the Bitcoin blockchain only tracks the location and movement of Bitcoins, Ethereum would be broader. In addition to tracking Ether coins, the ledger would also be able to track arbitrary blocks of data. As long as they were compatible with the structure of the Ethereum network, these blocks of data could even be programs that would utilize the validation network as a distributed virtual machine. Vitalik envisioned this as a vast, infinite machine, duplicated and distributed across thousands or millions of computers, a system onto which the entire history of a new internet could be immutably written, immune to censorship and impossible for governments to take down. He saw it dismantling banks and other intermediary industries, allowing everyone to be their own bank, to be their own stockbroker, to bypass governments, regulators, and insurance agencies. His peers envisioned a future where Ethereum became not just a repository of financial transactions, but of identity, with deeds, driver's licenses, professional credentials, medical records, educational achievements, and employment history turned into tokens and stored immutable and eternal on the chain. Through crypto and the Ethereum virtual machine, they could bring all the benefits of Wall Street investors and Silicon Valley venture capitalists to the poorest people of the world, the unbanked and forgotten. This heady, high-minded philosophy is outlined in great detail in the journalistic abortion, The Infinite Machine, by failed journalist turned crypto shill Camila Russo. The book is actually...
I do wish that he would present these things without like throwing these random ad hominem. Like we don't know if she's. I don't even know who this is. She or he, a failed journalist. Like maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I don't want to just trust this guy on that. You know what I mean? Um, and the idea of bringing like these tools of finance to the unbanked, like lending, like actually earning an interest rate on your money or being able to invest to people that don't have access to those things, right? I think this is a very strong use case for crypto, and it actually is working in a lot of countries. Um, and if you look at the adoption map of crypto, it's not just US based. So I think dismissing this is almost like a privileged position to have because there are people that don't have access to these things. And crypto does have the potential. A lot of people have a smartphone, but not a bank account, for example. Um, and a lot more people have a smartphone than access to buying stocks in the US for some of the best companies. So I don't think that this argument should just be dismissed, but let's keep watching.
Really interesting. Not for the merits of the writing, Rousseau fails to interrogate the validity or rationality of even the simplest claims and falls just shy of hagiography by occasionally noting that something was a bit tacky or embarrassing, but only just shy. She tells florid stories about the impoverished people that Vitalik and friends claim to be working to save, but never once considers that the solutions offered might not actually work, or that the people claiming to want to solve those problems might not even be working on them. That's actually a big issue, since the entire crypto space, during the entire time that Rousseau's book covers, was absolutely awash with astroturfing schemes, where two guys would go to some small community in Laos or Angola, take a bunch of pictures of people at a crypto investing seminar, generate some headlines for their coin or fund, and then peace out. For years, dudes were going around asking vendors if they could slap a Bitcoin sticker onto the back of the cash register because the optics of making it look like a place takes Bitcoin was cheaper and easier than actually using Bitcoin as a currency. We have an entire decade of credulous articles about how Venezuela and Chile are on the verge of switching entirely to crypto, based entirely on the claim of two trust fund dudes from San Bernardino. A whole 10 years littered with discarded press releases about Dell and Microsoft and Square bringing crypto to the consumers before just quietly.
Overall, I think a lot of these critiques are pretty valid because, like the thing about just going, taking some pictures in a poor community and then piecing out, like there were a ton of projects, especially around the 2017 bubble, and you're seeing this again today, that were just straight up scams, right? Trying to tell a good story and then capitalizing on that good story to take money from people. And with Bitcoin, there were a lot of false starts. Like, I don't know the exact story behind the slapping the stickers on different stores, but I do believe it.
Discontinuing their services after a year or two when they realize the demand isn't actually there. The fact the development of Ethereum was extremely dependent on a $100,000 fellowship grant from Peter Thiel is mentioned, but the ideological implications of that connection are never explored. The entire subject occupies a single paragraph, sprinkled as flavor into a story about Vitalik and his co-developers airing their grievances about some petty infighting. The book is mostly useful for its value.
Okay, so that point is absolutely like kind of made up. So the Thiel Fellowship is a fellowship by Peter Thiel, where I don't know all these bad things that he's saying about Peter Thiel, but he is a right-wing guy, and so a lot of people kind of question his motives. But even if that's the case, this fellowship, if you look at the list of people, let me see if I can pull that up. It's basically for entrepreneurs that are starting businesses, right? So the CEO of co-founder of Figma, which I actually used to make the thumbnail for this video. The Ocean Cleanup, Polkadot, another crypto thing. Software to detect Parkinson's disease. Luminar, which is a LiDAR company. Like these are all legitimate companies, right? Upstart. These are legitimate companies that legitimate entrepreneurs are doing. And Peter Thiel basically says here, don't go to college. Instead, get your education by actually trying to start a company. So here's a $100,000. And as you can see, like there are some pretty good things for the world that came out of that. So I don't think you can somehow tie that to something negative about Ethereum. Plus, Ethereum was not entirely dependent on this $100,000, right? They had they used crowdfunding. They had an ICO where a lot of people today who are rich because of crypto bought into the Ethereum ICO. A lot of normal people.
Value as a point of reference against reality. It's a very thorough, if uncritical, document of absolutely insane claims. The idea was that the traits of blockchain technology, such as having no central point of failure, being uncensorable, cutting out intermediaries, and being immutable, could also benefit other applications besides money. Financial instruments like stocks and bonds and commodities like gold were the obvious targets, but people were also talking about putting other representations of value like property deeds and medical records on the blockchain too. Those efforts, admirable considering Bitcoin hadn't and still hasn't been adopted widely as currency, were known as Bitcoin 2.0. I love this paragraph because it outlines just how disconnected from reality the people actually building cryptocurrencies really are. They don't understand anything about the ecosystems they're trying to disrupt. They only know that these are things that can be conceptualized as valuable and assume that because they understand one very complicated thing, programming with cryptography, that all other complicated things must be lesser in complexity and naturally lower in the hierarchy of reality, nails easily driven by the hammer that they have created. The idea of putting medical records on a public, decentralized, trustless blockchain is absolutely nightmarish, and anyone who proposes it should be instantly discredited. The fact that Rousseau fails to question any of this is journalistic malpractice.
So he's saying that the idea that these crypto people could solve the problems of all these industries, I think that is like a valid statement in the sense that, yeah, I think people are extremely overconfident in how easy it is to disrupt different industries. But if you look at different technologies, this is always the case, where at first they're experts in the technology, whether that's computers originally, whether that's AI, or crypto. People start out being experts in that technology, and then over time, slowly, and then quickly, that technology finds its way into other industries. So yeah, there might be a lot of hubris in a random crypto dude thinking that he could revolutionize some industry using crypto that he knows nothing about. But at the same time, this is how changes were made with the internet, with AI. AI is everywhere now. Etc. You start out by not knowing something, and then you get some people that might team up and use an industry expert combined with the technology expert to actually make an impact on the industry. And I think there is a lot of that happening in crypto right now.
Now, in terms of improvements over Bitcoin, Ethereum has many. It's not hard. Bitcoin sucks. In terms of problems with Bitcoin, Ethereum solves none of them and introduces a whole new suite of problems driven by the techno-fetishistic egotism of assuming that programmers are uniquely suited to solve society's problems. Vitalik wants his invention.
This is as someone who comes from a software engineering background, programmers do believe that they can solve everything. That's just how it is. So yeah, that's totally spot on.
To be an infinite machine, so let's ask what that machine is built to do. In order to really understand the full scope of this, we do need to dig a bit more into the technical aspects because that technical functionality informs the way that the rest of the system behaves. In a very McLuhanist way, the machine shapes the environment around it. As already mentioned, a blockchain consists of two broad fundamental components, the ledger and the consensus mechanism. All currently popular blockchains use an append-only ledger. Now this is, on its own, not that remarkable. Append-only is just a database setting that only allows new entries to be added to the end of the current database. Once something is written to the database, it's read-only. Standard applications are typically things like activity logs, which is conceptually all a blockchain really
all
is,
pretty much true.
a giant log of transactions. The hitch is that it's decentralized, with elective participants hosting a complete copy of the entire log, and this is where the second component comes in, the consensus mechanism. All validating participants, called nodes, have a complete copy of the database, and no one copy is considered to be the authoritative copy. Instead, there is a consensus mechanism that determines which transactions actually happened. This is all the proof of work stuff. Proof of work isn't the only consensus mechanism, but it's popular because it's very easy to implement by just cloning Bitcoin and is resilient against the kind of attacks that crypto enthusiasts care about. It's a very brute force solution, but legitimately, if you want a network of ledgers where no one trusts anyone else, just making everyone on the network do extreme amounts of wasted duplicate work is a solution. One of the major problems that this machine solves is what's called the...
He actually does a decent job covering like the fundamental technological parts of blockchain, but proof of work is a minority. At this point in time, literally every single project is planning on or has already moved away from proof of work except Bitcoin. So take that for what you will.
The double spend problem. How do you stop someone from spending the same dollar twice? If someone tries, how do you determine which transaction really happened? Banks solve this problem by not correlating account balance with any specific dollar, processing transactions first come first serve, which they track with central resources, and punishing users with overdraft fees for double spending. Eschewing a central solution, cryptocurrencies rely on their consensus mechanism. The most popular alternative to proof of work is proof of stake, where validators post collateral of some kind, usually whatever currency is endemic to the chain, with the amount of collateral determining their odds of being rewarded the validation bounty for any given transaction. The main proposal of proof of stake is that it significantly reduces the wasted power problems of proof of work, but it's less resilient than proof of work. On the energy cost side of things, proof of stake is still inefficient just by virtue of the sheer volume of redundancy, but on a per user basis, it's at least inefficient on the scale of like an MMO as opposed to a steel foundry. This is difficult to assess because the most popular proof of stake chains are still unpopular and low traffic in the scope of things, heavily centralized. Claims about scalability are backed up.
This isn't necessarily true. There are more centralized in general. Right now, Bitcoin and Ethereum are the most decentralized out of all of the crypto networks. And so it is a problem when a new network is starting that it starts out with a few people running the validators that are required to keep the network secure. But they're not getting a small amount of use. There are actually a lot more transactions happening on proof of stake networks than on proof of work networks right now.
By nothing but the creator's word. Proof of stake is also significantly more complex because there now needs to be some mechanism for determining who gets to do the validations and also determining how audits are conducted, and then the question of who has control over that system and whether or not someone can gain control of that system or control over the whole stake via just buying out the staking pool, etc, etc, etc. Proof of stake also even more explicitly rewards the wealthy who have the capital to both stake and spend. It's also even more explicitly exclusionary. Ethereum's proposed proof of stake migration has a buy-in of 32 Ether, which at the time of writing is about $130,000. So really only early adopters and the wealthy can actually meaningfully participate for more than just crumbs.
So this isn't necessarily true. The reason why there's a big monetary requirement to stake in Ethereum's new proof of stake model is because that's the money that gets lost if you are caught cheating, right? So in order for people to participate in that way, they need to have money at risk. But the benefits of staking can actually be achieved by anybody because all you have to do is delegate your Ethereum to somebody who is staking. So it's like having a representative, like a representative government. You have a representative on the blockchain and you get a direct proportion of the rewards that that person gets. So anyone can participate. But if you're actually the one casting the votes on different transactions, this is valid, this is not valid, you need to have money at risk, right? That's how it's people are stopped from cheating. So he doesn't really mention that part.
This is, in turn, compounding inherent problems with the long-term growth of the chain. Even if you solve the escalating power requirements of proof of work, the data requirements of storing the chain and participating as a validator are also prohibitive in a way that inevitably centralizes power in the hands of a few wealthy operators.
85 terabytes per year is totally fine, right? Like, because 85 terabytes per year, like if you have even one person that just keeps buying like $100 hard drive, like I think once every month, then they can store it, right? Like it's something like that. So it's too big for just like a casual user that just wants to run the chain on their laptop, but one dedicated user who cares, like they can totally afford to store the chain. So 85 terabytes not a big deal, right? But once you crank that number higher, there comes a point at which it starts becoming a really big deal.
The major downside of all these systems is that they're extremely slow. Proof of work is inefficient by design.
So that it's interesting that he uses that quote from Vitalik, basically saying that 85 terabytes a year is no big deal, because Vitalik, so he has a blog post recently that's actually talking about this problem. I'd encourage everybody to check it out. Vitalik.ca is his blog. Basically, he's extremely focused on the problem of getting the data required down, and so that quote was kind of taken out of context, in my opinion. And yeah, like he has an entire post on how we can make people who are running nodes more accessible to everybody. So.
And proof of stake has multiple layers of lottery that need to be executed before any transaction can be conducted, and in particular suffers from delays when elected validators are offline and the system needs to draw again. As an extension of being slow, they're also prone to getting overwhelmed if too many people try to make transactions simultaneously, which can cause desyncs between validators and even lead to what's called a fork, where two or more pools of validators reach a different consensus about the state of the network, and each branch keeps on going afterwards, assuming that it is the authoritative version. Forks can also be caused on purpose, and this is, in fact, the only way to effectively undo transactions. Like, if someone stole your coins, the only way to get them back would be to convince the people who manage the chain itself to negotiate a rollback. That's foreshadowing for later. Now, because the nature of a fork involves a disagreement on what transactions actually happened and who got paid for those transactions, this means that each arm of the fork has a vested interest in its own arm being the authoritative arm, so resolving forks can turn into irreconcilable schisms, which is funny as an outside observer viewing it as an inane internet drama, but is frankly unacceptable for anything posturing as a serious and legitimate currency. Like, it's important to stress that because of the nature of the chain, the way that the ID numbers of later blocks are dependent on the outcomes of previous blocks, these aren't just a few disputed transactions that need to be resolved between the buyer, the seller, and the payment processor. These are disagreements on the fundamental state of the entire economy that create an entire alternate reality. It's an ecosystem that absolutely demolishes.
So this is hilarious. The idea of forks in whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, like I think sometime last year there was a fork on Bitcoin based on two different miners. Basically, nothing nefarious happened, but the media loves to hype up forks as if they're these big existential things. But that's basically just how the consensus mechanism works. And when forks happen, it's working as planned. And there's a reason why, in order for a transaction to be finalized, you need a certain number of blocks before it is actually finalized. Because this number of blocks ensures that all these things that he's talking about don't actually happen. And so on Bitcoin, where blocks happen much less frequently, forks can last for longer. But that's why you don't use Bitcoin for transactions that you want settled in just a few seconds. With Ethereum, and especially with proof of stake chains, blocks are happening much faster, so these forks aren't lasting very long at all. They might be lasting for a few seconds.
Demolishes consumer protections and makes the re-implementation of them extremely difficult. One of the big selling points of all this technology is that it's particularly secure, very difficult for anyone to hack it directly since there's so much redundancy. A lot of hay is made about the system's resiliency against man-in-the-middle attacks, which are your classic Hollywood hacker type attacks. Someone sends a command from point A, and on the way to point B, it is intercepted and altered. Someone hacks into the bank and adds an arbitrary number of zeros onto their account balance. Evangelists will commonly claim that blockchain could revolutionize the global shipping industry and reduce fraud. It's a good claim to interrogate. First, the things that blockchain is capable of tracking are things that manufacturers and
Before he even gets into this, I don't know if this is a good claim to interrogate, because as far as use cases in crypto go, this is way down on the list of things that people are actually excited about, right? Some people do talk about it, but it's one of those things that comes up more kind of in media coverage than actually people working on it. But let's see what he has to say. And then afterwards, I'll give you an actual use case that crypto claims that they can do and are actually doing pretty well.
shippers are already tracking, or at least trying to track. So this is not so much revolution as it would be standardization. Even that is built on a predicate assumption that everyone picks the same chain. It's an extremely optimistic assumption. Many firms deliberately want their information centralized and obfuscated to protect against corporate espionage. The lack of a shared, standardized bucket to put all the information into is not because it's been heretofore impossible, but because it's been undesirable. Second, it assumes the existence of a theoretical mechanism that ensures the synchronization of the chain and reality above and beyond the current capacity of logistics software. Some means of preventing people from just lying to the blockchain and giving it the information it expects to be receiving, the blockchain equivalent of ripping off the shipping label and slapping it on the new box. The bigger problem here is that in the pantheon of fraud, man-in-the-middle attacks are actually pretty rare. Global shipping needs to deal with it in certain capacities, but taken on the whole, the vast majority of fraud doesn't come from altering information as it passes between parties, rather from colluding parties entering bad information at the start. Con artists don't hack the Gibson to transfer your funds to their offshore account, they convince you to give them your password. Most fraud comes from people who technically have permission to be doing what they're doing. Rather than preventing these actual common types of fraud, cryptocurrency has made them absurdly easy, and the main reason why cryptocurrency needs to be so resistant to man-in-the-middle attacks is because the decentralized nature of the network otherwise makes them acutely vulnerable to those attacks. What this all kind of means is that blockchains are all pretty bad at doing most of the things they're trying to do, and a lot of the innovations in blockchains are attempts at solving problems that blockchains introduced. The big
Okay, so, okay, let's see. He has one more thing to say.
biggest issue that cryptocurrencies have suffered from is a lack of tangible things to actually use them on as currencies, rent or food or transit. This is for pretty simple.
Okay, so basically he's saying cryptocurrencies are bad at solving the problems they claim to be solving. But he picks a problem that, like, kind of taking everything he says at face value, I kind of agree. That's not necessarily the most important place for blockchain to be introduced. Let me show you one problem that cryptocurrency has actually solved and is disrupting traditional financial institutions. Let's see, there was some... So the idea of a remittance is when someone sends money basically like back to their family across countries. So if someone is working for an international company, or they go and work in the US or in Europe, and they have family from a more developing country, a lot of times these people are sending money back to their families to help support them. Before crypto, the main way to do this was through Western Union or TransferWise. And the thing is, Western Union has an insane amount of fees, especially for smaller value transactions. So, and I'm pretty sure these fees are actually much lower since crypto has been adopted, because I've heard stories of fees being over 30%. But if you want to send $30 back to the Philippines, you're paying how much? yeah, sending $30 back to the Philippines. If you want to do it instantly, you're gonna pay for $30, you're gonna pay almost 20%. 12 hours is gonna cost $4. And yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but in places where a dollar goes a long way, and you're already paying taxes, and then you have another 10 to 20% taken off, then it's pretty bad. Meanwhile, with crypto, you can send thousands of dollars or $2 across country lines in seconds with the new proof of stake chains. And they don't need to be reliant on a cryptocurrency. You can use USDC, which is a dollar-based crypto coin, and send that. So this is an article by TechCrunch, which has not necessarily been the most pro-crypto site. Like, they're pretty fond of critiquing crypto. They talk about how cryptocurrency remittances are a lifeline in Afghanistan. So Western Union ceased operation in Afghanistan after the US withdrew. And so anybody that was getting money from family members overseas or getting support from people outside of the country, all of a sudden had their lifelines cut off, right? And so crypto was able to step in and fill that gap. Crypto will become increasingly indispensable as a local currency in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Conflict fuels inflation. I think this is a big point where it's easy to forget, if you're somewhere like the US, that some of the problems that crypto has might be too much of a problem for people who are living in a well-functioning society. But as things break down, like in Afghanistan, this actually has been able to save people, right? And it's cheaper and faster than the traditional financial services. So around 4% of the entire GDP is made up by people sending money back in Afghanistan. I think this quote's really good. So Bitcoin maximalists make wide-eyed claims about how crypto will change the global economic system. Whether or not you believe them, we can see that crypto has already revolutionized remittances in unstable, conflict-ridden places. Afghanistan presents a textbook use case for cryptocurrencies and failed states. I think this is a big problem with crypto, is that most crypto supporters are so insane to the point where they're like religious about cryptocurrency. It's hard to take them seriously, and they'll probably say that crypto could solve every single problem. And for anyone who's naturally skeptical, when you see someone coming at you that obviously has like this deep-seated belief that's almost religious, it's hard to take anything that they say seriously. And I think that's kind of one of the main things that this video is hitting on. And I actually believe it's true. But you have to be able to kind of ignore the religiousness, like the religious zeal of these maximalists, and actually see, okay, are there places where this technology can be useful? I know if you go, like, this isn't just one article, right? If you look at where Bitcoin has actually made inroads, it's true that one of those big places is the US, but also a lot of other countries. So if you search Bitcoin transfer, let's just see. Where is this search term popular? And this is in English. I'm not sure if Google actually translates. And then let's go to worldwide. So looking at this heat map of crypto, like, yeah, the US is big, but I think that's probably Nigeria is way bigger. And places like Ghana and Kenya and South Africa and Southeast Asia and Latin America, right? And Eastern Europe and Central, well, a little bit less Central Asia. But these are all places that have different problems than the US does. And these are places that are actually seeing more Bitcoin adoption than the US. And I don't know if this search term is even in English, right? In which case those numbers would actually be higher. I don't know if this is going to come up with anything. Yeah. But as you can see, like, the idea that cryptocurrency has not solved anything isn't true. And I don't know why he would pick the shipping case when I think crypto remittances, I can't even say that word, are a much stronger case if you're trying to highlight what people think crypto has actually worked for. But anyway, let's go back to the video.
Simple reasons. One is that the transaction fees on popular chains are so prohibitive that it's pointless to use them on any transaction that isn't hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. No one is going to buy the Bitcoin bucket from their local KFC. Ethereum's main transaction fee, called gas, on a good day runs around $20 US per transaction. But that's severely optimistic. As of December 2021, the daily average cost of gas hasn't gone below $50 US since August, with the 3-month daily average riding over $130. And that's just the daily average. The hourly price can and does swing by up to 2 orders of magnitude. The throughput of blockchains is so abysmal that transaction slots are auctioned off to the highest bidder. That's why these numbers are so extreme. It only takes a few high rollers competing on a transaction to drive the hourly price of gas up over $1,000.
Okay, so very true with Ethereum. Gas prices are insane, but the vast majority of transactions have shifted from Ethereum to layer 2s. I actually made a video about that, about like a layer 2 overview, but like just looking at the fees, l2fees.info, I think. So here are the transaction fees on layer 2s. As you can see, anywhere from 20 cents to $1. And Ethereum is only $7 right now, where he said that it was $10 on a good day. So he's not wrong, but it feels like he's almost kind of cherry picking, because these are where most of the transactions happen. And if you go to Polygon, yeah, I think we go to Polygon scan. So the current gas fees on Polygon, which is another chain that's built on top of Ethereum, where more transactions are actually happening. It's not giving us the actual prices, but these are like fractions of a penny to send transactions with Polygon. Fractions of a penny. So kind of disingenuous to just highlight the place where, like, it's like the old school thing, right? All of the transactions are shifting over to L2, and all of the new applications are being deployed on L2. So if you really want to do a valid critique, you'd have to talk about those L2s instead of the old system that people are moving away from.
US. The internal term for this is a gas war, because it's just that common. Bots, in particular, can drive gas prices well into the tens of thousands of dollars as they compete to capitalize on mistakes, such as someone listing something for sale well below its general market price.
Yeah.
Also, it needs to be stressed, these gas wars aren't localized to just the thing that's being fought over. If Steam is getting hammered because Concerned Ape posted Stardew Valley 2 by surprise, that will probably stay pretty well contained. If Taylor Swift concert tickets go on sale and Live Nation gets crushed, you might never even know. What those don't do is cause the cost of placing an order on DriveThruRPG to spike by 8,000% for 3 hours.
Yeah, this is actually an extremely valid criticism. When one application on blockchain gets an insane amount of use, like if there's an NFT drop, or someone was selling concert tickets, right? Then gas prices go up for all applications. And this, even in Polygon, which I was just mentioning, this happened when a new game was released and everybody was playing it and it was taking up a lot of gas. The fees went up like crazy, but the fees were still like on the orders of magnitude lower than Ethereum fees. But completely valid criticism.
The second big reason is that value on the coins themselves is so volatile that unless you're willing to engage with the speculative nature of the coins, there's actually a huge risk in accepting them as payment for anything. Bitcoin in particular, owing to its glacial transaction times, suffers from problems where the value of the coin can change dramatically between the start and end of a transaction. This is such a problem that it's led to the rise of an entire strata of middlemen in the ecosystem, so-called stablecoin exchanges like Tether that exist to quickly transfer cryptocurrencies between each other and lock in values. The stablecoins, rather than having a speculative value, have a value that's pegged to the value of an actual currency, like the euro or US dollar. The underlying problem that they exist to solve is itself twofold. One is that converting cryptocurrency into dollars is the step of the process that makes you accountable to the taxman, and the primary goal of crypto in general is to starve public services, so that's a no-go.
I mean, he's just throwing those random jabs in there, right? But I think that, yeah, stablecoins are actually a real solution to the volatility of cryptocurrencies. And he's using Tether as an example, and I personally won't touch anything that Tether is involved in. Like, I don't hold any Tether, and I actually had a position that was shorting Tether. But there are other more legitimate stablecoins like DAI, which is decentralized, and USDC, which is a public US company. It's basically they have reserves of US dollars to match each of their coins. So it's basically those coins are a bank deposit slip. And it actually does work. If I were to send remittances to someone in another country, that's how I would do it.
The second is that there just aren't actually that many buyers and there's not enough liquidity in the ecosystem to cash out big holdings. Tether, the largest stablecoin, used to advertise itself as being backed on a one-to-one basis back when it was called real coin, but that language has become far more nebulous over time as it's become obvious that it just isn't true. This is a very complicated situation, but the short version is that the people who own Tether also own a real money exchange called Bitfinex, and there's evidence that the two services, both which require having actual dollars on hand in order to back their products and facilitate exchanges, are sharing the same pool of money, swapping it back and forth as needed. This means that at any given time, either service is potentially backed by $0, or at least that's what the data implies might be the case. Point is that if you're a high roller with hundreds of millions of conceptual...
All the stuff he's saying about Tether and Bitfinex is true, right? Like, a lot of people that are kind of deep into crypto really don't like Tether and really want Tether to go away. And if you've been watching, so in my opinion, USDC is kind of like the legitimate alternative to Tether. And if you're looking at market caps, I wonder if we can do a comparison here of Tether versus USDC. So right now there's around $68 billion worth of Tether, which I think is bad. People should not trust Tether until they're more transparent with their holdings. So here's the Tether market cap. It's gone from, in the last year, from around 30 billion up to now almost 80 billion. Can I do a comparison? Okay, let's just go and then look at USDC, which thankfully is outpacing Tether. So right now they're at around 50 billion, but looking at their growth over the last year, so looking at their growth, they've gone from, let's do 1 year. They've gone from 6 billion up to 50 billion. So they've gone up almost 45 billion, right, from a smaller base. And Tether's gone up about the same, but from a much larger base. So hopefully, I think everyone who kind of is really into crypto wants USDC to pass Tether. But those criticisms of Tether are valid. It's just not the only stablecoin out there.
dollars tied up in cryptocurrency, there's a fundamental cash problem. Your holdings have inflated to tens, hundreds, or thousands of times what you put in, but that price is just theoretical. It's speculative. You have all this crypto, you can't meaningfully spend it, and there's not enough buyers for you to get it out. In order for you to cash out, you need to convince someone else to buy in.
This is like a little bit true in the sense that, yes, in any marketplace where anything is sold, whether that's commodities like wheat or stocks or whatever, you need a buyer on the other end of the transaction, right? So yes, it's true that you need someone else to buy in when you sell crypto, right? Or the price goes down. That's just how markets work. But this idea that there aren't enough people like buying in, or that you need to do some shady things in order to exit the crypto at current valuations. Like, current valuations of crypto are the current valuations of crypto, and prices go down a lot sometimes, right? And that's because there are more people exiting than coming in, right? And then when there are more people coming in than exiting, the price goes up. That's just how markets work for everything. So I'm not exactly sure what the point he's trying to make here is.
You need to convince someone else to buy in. These factors, taken holistically, mean that cryptocurrency is a bigger fool's scam. There's a lot of digital ink spilt trying to outline if it's a...
The bigger fool scam, I mean, you guys know I hate Ponzi schemes. I literally have 4 videos now on my channel, I guess 3, covering these kinds of bigger fool scams. But crypto as a whole does not fall into this bucket. And so what he's doing is describing a marketplace and then saying that's a bigger fool scam. I just fundamentally disagree when there are things that are actually creating value, right? So the value in crypto is from the use cases that are actually successful, like remittances, and like the games people are playing, right? Some people might call NFTs valuable, although I kind of agree there are a ton of scams there. So I just don't really buy into this concept that a marketplace functioning, like, yes, if you need people to come in to keep the price stable, that's just a marketplace. That's not a bigger fool scam. A bigger fool scam would require a checklist of more things, like having no value creation, etc.
A decentralized Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme or some hybrid of the two, which is a taxonomical argument that I'm not here to settle, but like both of those, it's a bigger fool scam. The whole thing operates by buying worthless assets, believing that you will later be able to sell them to a bigger fool. The entire structure of cryptocurrencies at their basic level of operation is designed to deliver the greatest rewards to the earliest adopters, regardless of if you're talking about proof of work or proof of stake. This is inherent to their being. As Stephen Deal...
So this idea that the earliest adopters of a new technology, or if you were to buy Apple stock before they released the iPhone, right? Yes, you would be the most rewarded. Taking risks on earlier projects gives bigger rewards when those projects succeed. That's just how investing works in general. Again, like, I just disagree that there's absolutely no value to crypto. And just look at my channel, look at the negative comments I get from certain crypto projects, right? I just did a video on Strongblock, which is a Ponzi scheme, and I got absolutely annihilated in the comments, right? I believe that there are a ton of these kinds of greater fool scams in crypto, but that doesn't mean that crypto itself is a greater fool scam.
Put it, these schemes around crypto tokens cannot create or destroy actual dollars. They can only shift them around. If you sell your crypto and make a profit in dollars, it's only because someone else bought it at a higher price than you did. And then they expect to do the same, and so on ad infinitum. Every dollar that comes out of cryptocurrency needs to come from a later investor putting a dollar in. Crypto investments cannot be anything but a zero-sum game, and many are actually massively negative-sum. In order to presume a crypto investment functions as a store of value, we must simultaneously need to suppose an infinite chain of greater fools who keep buying these assets at any irrational price and into the future forever.
Again, like, I think this is true for a lot of crypto projects, so.
All right, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the ape in the room.
NFT time. So I think he starts to talk about NFTs now. And that's kind of the main covering of crypto, the crypto stuff. And this is kind of getting to the part of the video that I have not seen yet. But in general, I think the thing that makes this video so popular and convincing is that all the critiques are actually valid for the most part, right? I think where this video is doing a poor job so far is talking about some of the positive aspects, and so they're kind of highlighting the worst of crypto, which I do believe is bad, right? The worst of crypto is a terrible place, and it is a greater full scam on a lot of these scam projects, and so it is a convincing video so far. Video loading.
Crypto astronaut, DJ moving so hazardous. Crypto, what I gon' dabble? Open seas like chapel, yeah.
NFTs, non-fungible tokens. On a conceptual level, the tech acts as a sort of generic database to mediate the exchange of digital stuff. The most optimistic read on it is a framework for a type of computer code that creates so-called true digital objects, meaning digital objects that possess the attributes of both physical objects and digital, being losslessly transmittable while providing strict uniqueness, which is an important concept. Strict uniqueness is a way of saying that two different things are different things, even if they're different copies of the same thing. My copy of Gray by E.L. James is strictly unique. While millions of copies of the book exist, this is the only copy that is this copy, and this is the only copy that has the very specific damage of being glued shut and thrown into the Bow River. It is also strictly scarce. While millions of copies of Gray exist, that's still a finite number, meaning it is possible, though not immediately practical, for the world to run out of copies. NFTs impose a simulacrum of this physical scarcity and uniqueness onto digital objects within their ecosystem. On a technical level, non-fungible token is just a token that has a unique serial number and can't be subdivided into smaller parts. Two tokens, even two that tokenize the same conceptual thing, are still strictly unique with different serial numbers. Within the
So basically, yeah, like what he's saying is the major innovation of NFTs is that you can have in digital form something that is scarce. When in the past, digital form meant that it was a file. It could always be copied bit for bit. Because there's a ledger of where all these files exist, right? The blockchain. You can have one that you know this person owns this. So if an artist published a painting or a piece of art that from their verified Ethereum address, people would be able to track which copy of the painting actually is the one that came from this artist, and that one would be verified.
In the context of Ethereum and its clones, these tokens are effectively a small packet of data that can contain a payload of code. It's a box that you can put a microprogram into. That microprogram is called a smart contract, a name that is so comically full of itself that I feel like it's misleading to even call them that, but I have to for simplicity's sake. But real quick, yes, that is how the inventors conceived.
I mean, the reason that smart contracts are called smart contracts is because they are computer programs that can execute. It's a contractual agreement between two parties that can execute a predefined computer program without any kind of third-party arbiter. So maybe it's kind of an egotistic name to call them smart, but the reason is that unlike Bitcoin, where you can only transact, right? That's kind of a contract between two different parties. A smart contract allows you to transact, but in different ways. Like maybe you're lending money at a certain interest rate, and everything is automatically executed without third parties. So that's why it's called a smart contract.
Conceptualize the role of these things as the unity of programming and law. The phrase code is law gets bandied about as an aphorism, and it's just so full of holes that we're going to be spending the next forever talking about it. Before we move into that, this is the root of it. There is a tremendous disconnect between what NFT advocates say they do and what they actually do. But, and this is very important, both the claimed functionality and the actual functionality are both bad. It's all broken, none of it works well, so the idea of it becoming the norm is terrible. But the prospect of what the world would look like if all the mythologizing and overpromising came true also super sucks. The end goal of this infinite machine is the financialization of everything. Any benefits of digital uniqueness end up being a quirk, a necessary precondition of turning everything into a stock market. There's nothing particularly offensive underpinning the concept of digital collectibles. Frameworks and subcultures for forms of digital collectibles have existed for decades within various contexts, but NFTs exist to lend credibility and functionality to the cryptocurrencies that they exist on top of. Okay. Code is law. Now, what that little smart contract program...
I mean, I'm curious to see why he thinks that this leads to the financialization of everything and gambling on everything. But it's not a completely baseless criticism. One reason why people in crypto can be so zealous and just kind of crazy about whatever thing that they're supporting is because they have their own financial situation tied into whatever it is, right? So if you own an NFT that costs you $50,000, which by some cases is cheap, right? If that's a significant portion of your net worth, you will be extremely tied to the public perception, or you'll care a lot about the public perception of that NFT, and so it just makes you an extremely biased actor. And unfortunately, that is endemic in crypto, where there are a lot of people who aren't really able to see things objectively because they have their financial worth tied to specific projects or specific NFTs.
Does is up to the token creator. It can be a relatively sophisticated applet that allows the user to execute various commands, or it can be a plain hypertext link to a static URL of an image, or anything in between. Most are a lot closer to static URLs than they are to functional programs. This is in part because the thing that NFTs have become synonymous with are digital artworks, but really what the token represents is arbitrary. It can be a video game item, a permission slip, a subscription, a domain name, a virus that steals all your digital stuff, or a combination of all of those. Well, the concept has been floating around since 2015 when the framework was thrown together in a day during a hackathon, and the first Ethereum implemented tokens were minted in 2017. For the mainstream, the story starts in the spring of 2021, following a string of high-priced sales of tokens minted by digital artist Beeple, culminating in a $69 million sale of a collage of Beeple's work in March via old money auction house Christie's. This high-profile sale triggered a media frenzy and an online gold rush as various minor internet celebrities raced to cash in on the trend, hoping to be the next to cash out big. Over the course of about 6 weeks, the ecosystem burnt through just about every relevant meme possible. Lena Morris, popularized on Reddit as Overly Attached Girlfriend, sold the original screen grab to Emirati music producer Farzan Fardin Fard for the equivalent of a little over $400,000 US. Zoe Roth, aka Disaster Girl, sold the NFT of the original Disaster Girl photograph to Fard for also $400,000. Kyle Craven sold the original Bad Luck Brian photo for $36,000 to anonymous buyer at A. Nyan Cat sold for almost $600,000 with multiple variants also selling for six figures. Allison Harvard sold Creepy Chan 1 and 2 for $67,000 and $83,000 respectively, also both to Fard. In addition to these high-profile sales of things that were already popular, whale buyers like Fard were dropping 4- and 5-figure sales onto a random assortment of other artworks.
I think this is actually kind of like good, right? These people who never asked to become memes get some kind of financial benefit for the value that they put out into the world through their meme, right? So it's nice to see that those people were able to be rewarded for having to go through whatever it was. And that this guy, it seems like most of them were bought by this one guy, and he was dropping like huge purchases on just random artists, which is awesome.
Corporations and individuals auctioned off NFTs representing intangible, non-transferable concepts like the first tweet or the first text message. Cryptocurrency evangelists jumped at every opportunity to proselytize this new, bold, revolutionary marketplace that would free artists from the yoke.
So before you get too deep into NFTs, there's a huge, I don't think you can just say cryptocurrency evangelists as one big generic category, because especially with the onset of NFTs, there are tons of different subgroups. And so I think a more proper way would be to say NFT evangelists, because a lot of crypto people actually hate NFTs, and they hate like this CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, that kind of stuff. I'm personally somewhere in the middle where I'm just indifferent to NFTs. I've never bought an art-based NFT. I do think that they have some interest beyond art, but I am happy that some artists are able to monetize their work that way.
Of the gig economy and provide buyers with an immutable record of ownership of authenticated artwork stored on an eternal distributed machine. You could be holding the next generation's Picasso. Artists could continue to earn passive revenue from secondary sales. Imagine what it'll be worth in 5 years. This created an air of absolute mania, as it seemed like anything could be the golden ticket. Digital artists, especially those working with media like generative art that's difficult to monetize via conventional channels like physical prints, raced into the space and, on the whole, lost a lot of money. Critics began questioning what it was that was actually being bought and sold. Copyright.
So this is like, he's phrasing it as if artists lost a lot of money, but all of these headlines are basically showing that artists didn't make money. So only 1% of NFTs sell for more than $1,500. 75% sell for $15 or less. So I would be curious about, in general, with art, what those numbers are. What percentage of paintings sell for over $1,500? When the cost to upload an NFT to OpenSea is very low, especially on Polygon. Anyone, like a lot of people paint, but they don't have their painting in galleries or for sale in any way, right? So imagine if all those people could all of a sudden put their paintings for sale. What percentage would actually be sold? What percentage would be valuable? I think the fact that 1% is selling for over 1,500 is actually kind of crazy, kind of like a lot. But like I said, yeah, I don't know. Moving on. Lost my train of thought.
Lost a lot of money. Critics began questioning what it was that was actually being bought and sold. Copyright, commercial permission, a digital file, bragging rights? In a huge number of cases, the answer wasn't very clear, and even the sellers, caught in the promise of a payday, weren't altogether sure what they had even sold. Tons of the tokens did little more than point to images stored on normal servers readily accessible via HTTP, meaning the bought assets would be just as vulnerable to link rot as anything else. Some pointed to images stored on peer-to-peer IPFS servers, which are more resistant to link rot, as, similar to a torrent, it only requires that someone keep the file active somewhere rather than requiring the original server to stay up. But as millions of dead torrents prove, that's still a far cry from the eternal storage solution that evangelists were claiming. The images were stored and delivered the same way as any other image on the internet, easily saved or duplicated simply by virtue of the fact that in order for your computer to display an image, it needs to download it. Claims of digital scarcity apply only to the token itself, not the thing the token signified. More than that, there was no cryptographic relationship between the image and the tokens. The image associated with a token could be easily altered or replaced if the person with access to the server that the image...
This is a completely valid and like big problem with NFTs, that a lot of them were just linked to a Google bucket, or like a file on Google Drive, right? And like having the image in a place where the image could just be deleted, it really isn't this eternal thing that people are talking about. And there have been cases where those images just get like deleted, or the URL gets changed or whatever, right? It's kind of taking this fancy idea of an NFT and then putting it onto like this very basic, non-technologically strong thing. Also, I'm having problems with my audio. So if you just bear with me 1 second, trying to get this worked out on my headphones. I'm assuming you guys can still hear. I can read the subtitles for now. So okay, sorry about that. All right, let's just play, see what happens. I'll try and work on it in the background.
Which was hosted on, just changed file names, making the relationship between the two tenuous and flimsy in a way that undermined the claims that
Okay, here we go. We're back.
this was somehow a more durable, reliable way of transacting digital art. There was also no root proof of authenticity, no confirmation that the person minting the artwork was the person who created the artwork. This is a pretty handy encapsulation of the way that blockchain fails to solve the most common problems with fraud, which tend to start with bad data going into a system at the input, not data being altered midstream.
This is 100% true, like completely true. Anyone can upload an NFT of anything and make it into an NFT. So you know how people on Twitter have those profile pictures with the hexagons? If you wanted to take one of those CryptoPunks, you could mint your own NFT CryptoPunk and get it verified on Twitter. So then people wouldn't be able to tell anyway if it was an actual CryptoPunk or not, unless Twitter had some kind of database of all the verified NFT projects and their addresses.
Artists who complained about this system, which clearly incentivized impersonating popular artists, including deceased artists, were told that it was their fault for not jumping in sooner, that if they had bought in and minted their stuff first, then it would have been easy to prove the forgeries. Because evangelists don't see this as a tool, as a market that may or may not fit into an artist's business. They see it as the future. So failure to participate isn't a business.
Yeah, like the people that are responding in this way, that like the stuff he's bringing up, are just toxic. And I don't think you can lump those into the category of everybody, but it is a lot of people in the crypto community, and it is pretty sucky.
Decision, it's just a mistake. They're terrible people. All told, the frenzy collapsed pretty quickly. By June, the market had already receded by about 90%, which incidentally just further incentivized the low-effort process of minting other people's artwork, to the point that art platform DeviantArt implemented an extremely well-received feature that scans several popular NFT marketplaces for matching images. The output of that is extremely depressing. Not to labor the point, but reposting digital art without attribution is nothing new. Profiting off someone else's art is also nothing new. All that's new is NFTs represent a high-energy marketplace with an irrational pricing culture where the main buyer is easily flattered and not particularly discerning. The potential payoff is extremely high, much, much higher than a bootleg Redbubble store. The consequences border on non-existent, and the market is clearly in an untenable state, so there's an incentive to get in at as low a cost as possible before it collapses. Hence, the absolute plague of art theft. Even the argument that artists could make passive revenue off secondary sales turned out to have a lot of caveats attached. One, the smart contract for the token needs to...
So far, all this criticism is completely valid. I think the good news is that a lot of people are working on solutions to this, but yeah, like the NFT craze came with a lot of problems.
To have a function that defines royalties, so anyone who minted a token based off of hype, making it sound like an inherent function of the system, was out of luck. And two, the token doesn't know what a sale is and can't differentiate between being sold and being transferred. So it's actually the marketplace that informs the token you're being sold and collects the royalties. End result, royalties are easily bypassed simply by using a marketplace that doesn't collect royalties or uses a different format of royalty collection that's incompatible with the function the token uses. While a few sellers...
It's interesting, and you can see, like, I think Heidi Klum just recently bought a CryptoPunk, and her transfer was not on a marketplace, it was outside of a marketplace. So that might have been exactly what he's talking about, where they're avoiding those fees. But there are ways to combat this. Like one example is that in the NFT contract, you could require a specific address to approve the transfer, right? And you could have automatic approvals for certain whitelisted exchanges and then manual approvals otherwise. Obviously, this adds a little bit of censorship where the original artist can decide who gets their painting, but it's just one example of a solution. Maybe that combined with some other things might actually solve this problem. So there are potential solutions to these things.
Legitimate and otherwise, made off with undeniably big paydays, hundreds of thousands of artists bought in only to find that there wasn't a new, revolutionary, highly trafficked audience of digital art collectors. Instead, there was a closed market, dealing in casino chips, where the primary winners were those already connected, who already had the means to get the attention of the whales in the media, a market where participation required buying into a cryptocurrency at a rapidly fluctuating price in order to pay the minting costs to post the work where it would sit unsold. This left those artists in the lurch, where they had to choose between just eating the losses or attempting to convince their existing audience to buy in as well. The people who actually won were the people with large holdings of cryptocurrency, specifically Ethereum, which mediated the vast majority of these big ticket purchases. David Gerard, author of Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, summarized it on his blog very succinctly as such. NFTs are entirely for the benefit of the crypto grifters. The only purpose the artists serve is as aspiring suckers to pump the concept of crypto, and of course to buy cryptocurrency to pay for minting NFTs. Sometimes the artist gets some crumbs to keep them pumping the concept of crypto. The rush benefits them in...
Obviously, it's an extremely cynical take. It did benefit Ethereum to bring more people into the Ethereum ecosystem. But a lot of artists, like I think Beeple, right, is the perfect example. He's on a ton of podcasts you can listen. Like he actually was just a digital artist long before NFTs were a thing. And it finally gave him the chance to monetize. Obviously, he's one in a million, right? But there are a lot of people that have had more moderate degrees of success. So it's a cynical take. I think there's a little bit more nuance there.
Two ways. First, the price of Ether itself goes up directly from the spike in demand. Between January and May, the price of Ether rose from $700 to $4,000. And second, there's new actual buyers who aren't just trading Bitcoin for Tether for Ether and back again, but are buying in with dollars, providing the whole system with the liquidity needed for whales to actually cash out. This arrangement, needing to buy a highly volatile...
The whole idea, I would love to see some proof that, and which is all on the blockchain, you could do it with blockchain analytics, that this was all for the benefit of whales, right? As far as I know, everybody, including whales, lost money from the peak of crypto in May to the months afterwards, right? People weren't immune just because they had more crypto. In fact, those whales were a lot of times the people that bought the most. So I would just love to see some proof, because he keeps saying that this is all for the benefit of the people with the most crypto. But I mean, a lot of people owned Ethereum beforehand that were not whales and benefited from the run up, then also did not benefit from the crash. So maybe all the whales did sell at the top, but he's given absolutely zero proof for that. So that's what I would want to see in order for me to just kind of take it at face value, because it sounds like he's kind of assuming that. He hasn't even said what the proof is, much less show it.
Coin from people who paid far, far less for it in order to participate in a market that they control is why people reflexively describe the whole arrangement as a scam. If you buy in at $4,000 and compete against people who bought in at $4, you're the sucker. It reveals the basic truth that these aren't marketplaces, they're casinos. And indeed, even through all the rhetoric of protecting artists and whatnot, was the ever-present specter of the gamble. Whatever you buy now might be worth hundreds of times more later.
For NFTs.
Constantly invoked is the opposite proposition of the bad deal. What if you had been the person who bought in at $4? Let's take a closer look at that eye-watering $69 million Beeple sale. Independent journalist Amy Castor has done an enviable job running down the details here in her piece, Metakovan, the mystery Beeple art buyer, and his NFT DeFi scheme. But to summarize the long and short of her notes, the buyer is a crypto entrepreneur named Vignesh Sundaresan who purchased the piece to boost the reputation and value of his own crypto investment scheme, MetaPurse, and MetaPurse's own token, B20, which Beeple owns 2% of the total supply of. Following the Christie's sale, the reported value of B20 went from 36 cents per token to $23. And that's just the anatomy of a single sale. The very obvious conclusion observers reached was that
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't actually heard that before. And so, yeah, interesting point.
none of this is about the art at all, but the speculative value. Not what it's worth to you, but what it'll potentially be worth in the future to someone else. It's not a market, it's a casino. Gambling on the receipt for an image or video that otherwise infinitely digitally replicable. The thing
I think a lot of these critiques are extremely valid for NFTs, where a lot of these projects, especially kind of the derivative secondary projects that came after the first wave, that second and third wave, are just all cash grabs, right? There are a handful of interesting, unique projects where maybe you can buy weapons in the game for an NFT or something. So if you played RuneScape, you might have a weapon that you could pull and bring to World of Warcraft, which you could bring to some other MMO. But as far as these generative, like profile pic NFTs, I think a lot of the people are motivated solely by someone else buying at a higher price. So I agree. Casino.
itself is immaterial as long as it can make a line go up. This is the essence of the market and a microcosm of what evangelists imagine they want to see as the future, the financialization of everything. The frenzied market around old Reddit memes was doomed from the start. There's a finite supply of meaningful originals, so to keep this thing going, to keep the line going up, you need something more. Something less tied to anything specific.
Sir, the Lambo's ready.
What?
In the
So
months
dumb.
since the initial craze, the marketplace had mutated. The it thing was no longer memes or digital works from established artists, but character profiles from large, procedurally generated collections.
Oh,
with
here we
names-
go. So CryptoPunks is interesting because, as far as I know, they were kind of the originator of this, like programmatically generated collection of things with different attributes, right? Basically, we're getting into Pokemon cards, Beanie Babies, whatever, Magic the Gathering. Everything has different attributes and different rarities, and so people like that. But we'll see what actually happens with it.
Names like CryptoPunks, Bored Ape Yacht Club, Lazy Lions, Cool Cats, Ether Gals, Gator World, Baby Llama Club, Magic Mushroom Club, Rogue Society Bot, and Crypto Chicks. These were notable for, again, commanding utterly irrational prices, seemingly completely decoupled from any legitimate or legal transaction, and being generally extremely fugly. This surge generated an immediately adversarial relationship between the buyers, who touted them as both evidence of their extravagant wealth and their foresight into the future of digital economies, and pretty much everyone else.
I think this is pretty true. Like a lot of people who own Bored Apes or CryptoPunks now, it is kind of a show of wealth, right? Because it doesn't. No, these people didn't accomplish anything to get their Bored Apes. Some people may have seen the trend and bought in early who own CryptoPunks, but because anyone can buy them with money, and the prices of CryptoPunks right now like are insanely high. Let's just look at it. I'm curious because the crypto market has kind of gone up a little bit in the last 2 weeks. Okay, CryptoPunk floor price. 66 ETH in dollars, $196 for the cheapest CryptoPunk, right? So if you can just spend $200,000 on something completely worthless, then yeah, it's a show of wealth. It doesn't mean anything. You didn't do anything cool in order to get that. Doesn't mean you beat a boss in a game. I actually talked about this in a recent video I made, and Vitalik, whose blog is really good, you guys should definitely try and read it. This last post is on soulbound NFTs, which are NFTs that cannot be transferred. So if you beat a boss in a game that is hooked up to NFTs or something, you get maybe an NFT saying you beat the game, and you can't transfer that or sell it to the highest bidder. It just stays with you. And so if you see someone with this NFT, it's proof that they were able to do that. I think like things like Fortnite, right? There are some skins that you have to earn. And League of Legends have some badges and stuff that you actually have to earn. You could make NFTs that basically follow that, which is kind of a cooler use case than just making something that can be bought by literally anyone who has the money to buy it.
A very common response to anyone using one of these profile pics or bragging about their purchase became saving and reposting the image in reply, or even changing profile pics to match. Spurred by a speculative tweet from Twitter developers suggesting that they were working on an NFT verification system, Twitter users broadly rallied at the opportunity to immediately identify people that it was okay to bully. Tweets from within the cryptosphere started leaking out, things like Santiago Santos tweeting things like NFTs equal identity 2.0. Can't remember the last time I used my pick on the left.
Yeah, I mean, this is just so true. If you think about someone who spends $200,000 to buy something, of course they're going to be bought into it, right? It's kind of like people just get these ridiculous opinions on NFTs once they buy in. So I would try and find the people who are open to the idea of NFTs, but don't necessarily have hundreds of thousands of dollars of their net worth tied into it if you actually want to find a nuanced opinion.
Emphasis on physical traits, genetic lottery, prone to bias and prejudice, identity by choice, unique and digitally scarce, representation of values and beliefs. Of course, what Santiago was leaving out was that he had paid the equivalent of $171,000 US for that profile pic, which probably gives him some incentive to really commit to it as something interesting and special.
I will say, he's basically saying what I just said, right? I haven't seen the video past this point, so we're watching it together for the first time. But yeah, I completely agree. People just get so biased once they've already put financial, or put money into it.
Even though, stripped to the studs, literally all he was describing was using a non-representational image as a profile pic. For about 6 years, my profile on the Dungeons & Dragons forums was a stock photo of a cabbage, so not really breaking new ground here. Greg Eisenberg sat at his computer and decided to bang out, most people who make fun of NFTs own 0 NFTs, have never minted an NFT, have never participated in a community, have never staked their NFT, haven't built on top of an NFT project, have never earned an NFT playing a game, missed out on Bake, Punks, Cool Cats, etc. A chain of logic
I think that this is, people who own NFTs should make fun of NFTs more, because it would make them more believable, right? If there's some times when people just get so serious about certain topics, if you put $200,000 into something, if that means that you can't take a joke about that thing being dumb in some ways, then that's a problem, right? You got to be able to take the joke, and I think it's a problem with the NFT community that they have to be able to take the joke more often.
Implying that skeptics of the market are just uninformed, sore losers. Incidents like these lent to the very accurate perception that the loudest voices in NFTs weren't very familiar with internet culture as a whole, weren't terribly smart in general, and were by and large coming at all this from the financial side, further supported by all of them having "tweets are not investment advice" in their Twitter bios. In short, the same people who made and bought Juicero.
That's kind of funny.
It's a Juicero.
It also laid bare that the conversations were inherently suspect. How can you ever trust the sincerity of someone telling you how awesome their $171,000 investment is when your persuasion stands to directly benefit them by potentially driving up the value of their investment portfolio? Very true. You've got to be extremely rich for $171,000 to not be an extremely sunk cost, and that's absolutely going to weigh on your mind and influence how you see the market. So for my part, I tweeted about several of these incidences and was in response hounded for days by annoying people with NFT profile pics who insisted that I just didn't get it. I wasn't seeing the community. So I decided to go see the community. My experiment started with the Cool Cats Discord, one of the communities that I'd been assured was top of the pile. I joined, read back through days and days of conversation logs, watched the active conversations, and was...
It's good to actually go into the Discord when you're kind of looking at a project. It's really interesting. On all my videos, most of them at least, if I do a video on a project, I'll usually look through the Discord, and you can learn a lot of information. So I definitely think he's doing the right kind of research by going in there.
Generally unimpressed. It was at best unremarkable. A primary concern was still rooted in the monetary value of the tokens.
If you spend 1 million on a cat, it's not just for Twitter, and no one would be happy seeing someone mint another one later for free. That's why punks are at 120 ETH.
So true. Like some Discords are all about the development of the project and everything. I'm talking about outside of NFTs because I'm not really a participant in these NFT communities. You'll see some of them are 100% price focused, and some of them are 100% or 95% development focused. And so I think you really want to be in the communities that are less focused on the price, and those are the ones that ironically will probably make you more money.
Symbols,
and are better
memes,
investments.
There's the value.
What wasn't unremarkable is the way that I was immediately deluged by bots sending me invites to other Discords. So between the spam I was receiving and the Cool Cats dedicated shill channel, I came up with an idea.
Yep, I mean, he's not wrong. So far on the video, it seems like he's been right on the NFT stuff, mostly, and just kind of super biased and not necessarily right on the like cryptocurrency in general stuff.
I wanna thank y'all for checking out this joint. See how I'm Vandal, the token rapper. And this right here is a brand new chapter. Follow me as I go Rambo to the moon in my brand new Lambo.
For days now, I've been accepting every spam NFT Discord invite I've received, and it's getting dire. Stoner Cats, Oni Ronin, Magic Mushroom Club, NF Tits, The Humanoids, Ether Gals, Cool Cats, Senzu Seeds, Pro Camel Riders, Long Ween Club, Stick Humans, Bumping Uglies, World of Wojak, Gen Map,
So
Dimes,
many bad
Magic Marbles,
NFT projects.
Beverly Hills Car Club, Cash Cows, Long Neck Cartel, Pug Force, Hood Punks, Gorilla Club, Alien Archives, Betting Buddhas, Fighting Turtle Club, The Iconimals, Basement Dwellers, Wizardman Jenkins, Cotty, Metamons, Crazy Skulls, Box Gang, Gym Punks, Uncovered, Nitro Punk, Crypto Bulls,
Okay, we
Masquerade
get it.
Massacre, Cat Colony, SkellFTs, Daffy Panda Ganging Up, Betting Kongs, Wolves of Wall Street, Happy Sharks, Teacup Pigs, Cool Llamas, Mad Carrot Gang, Barnyard Fashionistas, Soul Cities, Oink Club, Outlaw Punks, Crypto Astronauts, NFT Worlds, Panda Paradise, Time Travelers, Cyberkongs, Party Ape Billionaire Club, J-Corps, Cryptocados, Meta Birds, and that's about as far as I got before more or less giving up and finally shutting off Discord DMs. Now, this is a fraction of what's out there, but I do think it's a pretty representative sample, and I learned a lot. For example,
Pretty
the
true, I
basic
think.
psychological profile of the average buyer is someone who is tenuously middle class, socially isolated, and highly responsive to memes. They are someone who has very little experience with real businesses and production processes, thus are unlikely to be turned off by unrealistic claims about future returns.
This is actually kind of true with most crypto scams in general, but you have to also talk about the huge number of people that own CryptoPunks or Bored Ape Yacht Club, like, I don't know, just going down the list, Serena Williams, like Heidi Klum, Snoop Dogg, like a lot of these big celebrities are getting into them too, which does say something, right? To be in the same group as them, I think people would value that, even though this idea of like an exclusionary group where, like literally a yacht club, right, where you have to pay hundreds of thousands in order to become a member, it's kind of dumb. But you can't say it's just all middle-class people who know nothing about nothing.
They are insecure about their lack of knowledge, and this makes them very susceptible to flattery, in particular being assured that the only reason for negativity is because critics just don't understand what they understand. Being tenuously middle class gives them enough disposable income to engage with a pretty expensive system, but also a very potent anxiety about their financial future. It goes without saying that they're fixated on money and they principally understand the technology as a means of making money. Criticism of the system is typically met with confusion. Don't you want to make money? I also learned a lot about fraud and how to do it both on purpose and by accident. The term rug pull, with its derivations rug and rugged, all to describe projects that made big promises but then took the money and ran, embedded themselves in my vocabulary extremely quickly. The market is just absolutely lousy with fraud and deception. Wash trading, where you sell something to your own sock puppets in order to lure in real buyers who think they're getting a good deal, is rampant.
True.
Market manipulation is
Very
so
true.
common and accepted
You
that
just can't, like, when you see a sale, it's so easy for people to just do these fake sales, right? And pump up the price. So just be careful out there.
Actually considered bad form if project leaders don't actively engage in it. Like, it's considered disrespectful to the buyers if the project leaders don't help them inflate the resale price. Also, and I really should not leave this merely implied, the art is bad, but not in any sort of interesting way. It's bad in a smoothed over copycat way, a low effort garbage dump from artists who have largely given up on having ideas or opinions. Derivative, lazy, ugly, hollow, and boring. The capacity for original thought long having...
It's just a blanket statement. Like, there are some interesting, like, okay, one, Doodles NFT. I just think the art's cool, right? I kind of like the, here's their Twitter. Just saying all of it's completely bad and derivative. Like, this project has gotten pretty popular. And, like, compared to the ones he's showing, like, right, some kind of low effort thing. I don't know, it's just a quirky style that you would see, like, some animator or something. It's definitely, like, a unique and individual style that is kind of cool. They did this thing where everyone who had a doodle got a spaceship to put their doodle in. So, like, I'm not saying you should go out and buy one. I think they're extremely overpriced. And yeah, it's not like Picasso, but it's interesting. It's not completely terrible. It's just cool. Cool, unique style. I like the colors.
Being drained out of the illustrators, kept in the employ and proximity of people who refuse to shut up about cryptocurrency, there is an overwhelming tendency to fall back on stale memes and self-flattery. A massive volume of cryptocurrency art ends up being art about cryptocurrency.
It does all look the
transparent
same,
pandering to
for the
an
most
audience
part.
that is either deeply stupid or easily pleased, and quite possibly both. Absent any artistic insight, the vacuum is instead filled to overflowing with references to Doge memes, Bitcoin, Ethereum, stonks, to the moon, buy the dip, good morning, and desperate pleas.
So the idea of, like, Doge memes, and if you see any crypto coin that has Elon or Musk or Mars or some kind of dog in the name, just avoid it, because almost all of those are just pure scams. Shiba Inu, like, I don't know. I'm not a fan, right? Dogecoin, funny story, Dogecoin was actually the first coin that I interacted with because I built stuff to mine it way back when. And the coins I mined would have been worth millions of dollars, but I got rid of them right away, so.
For senpai Elon Musk to notice them, all presented with the earnestness and authenticity of a Pickle Rick bong. It's tempting to say that my approach, accepting every spam invite, was a really flawed way to delve deeper, that obviously accepting invites from spam bots would mainly lead me into less stable projects. But surprisingly no. I got just as much spam for successful projects as humanoids and NFT worlds as I did for rug pulls like crypto astronauts and hoodpunks. On the whole, if you just look at the pitch package and the sample product, there's very little material difference between a project that's going to sell out 10,000 tokens in 6 hours and one that's going to become a trash fire as the project leader has a nervous breakdown and burns them in 3 days post-launch after only selling 800 tokens.
But to be fair, is that different than art in general? There are some amazing artists that sell their work for pennies compared to artists that are selling their work for millions of dollars that anyone can do, right? Like, there are all these kind of insider knowledge schemes in the art world in general. So it's like one of those cases where crypto doesn't solve the problem. Humans are still humans, and a lot of the same things still happen, right?
Party Ape Billionaire Club sold out, bringing in about $3.2 million, and are now flexing their wealth by partnering with other crypto projects like the 2 Chainz produced NFT cartoon show, The Red Ape Family, which is just really truly shows off the community's deep pockets and commitment to quality.
So bad.
Deep in their roadmap is the promise that they will start production on an MMORPG, a claim that buyers are entirely faithful in. Crypto Astronauts sold 1,262 of their 9,400.
If you're ever trying to judge a project, NFT or otherwise, look at what the team has done with that project so far, not what they promise on doing.
Following the failed mint in October, the devs slowly went quiet, and then bit by bit, websites, social media accounts, and eventually the Discord itself all disappeared. Based off the ostensible product, why should one of these succeed and the other fail? The key distinction ultimately between a Party Ape Billionaire Club and a Crypto Astronauts is that PABC was already flush with cash and able to manufacture hype with high-priced giveaways and expensive advertising. Buying advertising space in Times Square, in particular, is a specific fixation. But running a 10-second ad every 8 minutes on one out-of-the-way billboard in Times Square isn't effective advertising, not externally. All it's really good for is internal propaganda, making insiders feel like the money that they've spent is buying credibility. And if you're in a speculative bubble, betting that someone down the line will buy you out for more than you bought in, credibility is worth everything in the world.
Most game devs would hesitate to post this to Twitter. They posted it to Times Square.
This is pervasive. Even in the most established projects, ones that have been going for years, there's not really an underlying thing. These aren't fandoms in the way that you would experience them around a game or a TV show or a book. The product is pretty insubstantial, if not functionally non-existent. This is where these projects diverge significantly from the artworks that drove the speculative mania in the spring. They're not positioning themselves as art that's worth possessing for the art, as flimsy and illusory as that claim was, but as ongoing projects that you buy into. The purchase of a token is an abstracted version of buying early stock in a company, a venture capital style investment in promises, which is a very significant mutation. Okay, so what do these phantom companies claim to exist to do? Pretty much all of them promise direct financial returns in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes this is just a nebulous sense that the whole thing will go.
So I think like this is the case, but NFTs do have some interesting use cases, and you can't judge it based on what's happened so far. So the .com boom in the late 90s was just the internet. Everyone was like, oh, let's make smells.com, where you can smell things through the computer with zero technology to back it up, right? But eventually that led to things that actually do have value. And a lot of the websites like YouTube that we go on today, right? So you have some projects with a little bit of value mixed in with these projects with absolutely no value and a bunch of promises. And luckily what's already been happening and what's going to continue to happen in the NFT space, I believe, is that these projects that have zero inherent value will be weeded out, right? The prices will crash. People will stop paying attention to them anymore. People get excited by this new thing because there is some potential of new applications. But at the beginning of a cycle, it's only promises, right? And a lot of the projects will only ever have those promises and won't actually build something. As things do start to get built as the years go on, some projects might actually build some cool things. And then those are the ones that will really be like the second wave of NFTs. And that's the one to really watch. It's like the second wave of internet companies, the ones that survived past the .com era, like Google, you know, the ones that, like, social media was kind of the third wave of internet companies. So just like be on the lookout when NFTs crater and all these generative derivative projects go to zero, what kind of hangs around and which teams keep building, right? Because those are the ones that you're going to want to actually pay attention to. And those are the ones that might realize the actual promises of NFTs.
Betting Kongs is not your ordinary NFT project. We aim to create passive income for our NFT owners by co-owning a casino with a profit
Avoid
split.
any project that
Welcome
says
to the white
passive
paper,
income.
fellow gamblers. Why are we doing this? To put it short, We love gambling, and we noticed
God,
how
I
a
hate
lot
this
of the
voice so
operators
much.
out there are owned by large corporations who have no care for
Just
the
can't stand this
community
voice.
or the service they provide. We want to provide a project where everyone
I mean, the
playing
idea
can
of a
be the
casino
co-owner of
that's
place
where
they're
the
playing at and
liquidity
make
is
money
owned by the
from it
people
all.
who are
Failure was
gambling
probably
is
the
actually
best
interesting.
outcome for everyone
Better than a
there,
big casino
if we're
company
being
getting the money.
honest. Some promise this in the form of a more conventional media project, like a comic book or a cartoon or a movie, or all of the above.
We have planned the creation of a series of comics dedicated to the Pixel Girl. The key image is static, or at least we think so now, but the squeaky girl is still a seductress, so the image of breasts will be
Yo, Neil,
presented
thank you
in
for those
various
comments.
variations that
Really
our
appreciate
community
it.
will approve.
It's the comments
Let's
like you
imagine
that keeps
there
me
are
going, keeps me putting out
5,000
videos. So I really
NFTs
appreciate you,
holders.
and I hope
There is a
to live up to
30
your
million
expectations.
market of
Looking
comics
forward to
lovers
seeing
in
you
the
around
US.
in the future.
On average, every comics lover spends around 20 USD per comic per week. It means $80 per month and $960 per year. The total addressable
Yeah,
market,
like people just have insane expectations. If it's okay with you guys, I'm gonna put this on 1.25 speed, just because I feel like it can be a little slow at times.
is worth 28 billion 800 million.
Let me
USD.
know if it's too fast.
Let's imagine we take 1% of this market. It's 288 million USD per year on the base of monthly subscriptions raised in crypto. This is a cash flow.
Nice to see some active communication and
Yeah,
appreciate
obviously
the
you
effort,
can't
as
just
announced this
create
afternoon,
a
trying to
popular
resurrect
comic
this
from
project
scratch.
into something
There's
successful.
so many good
the
ones
only
out
thing
there.
I would like to see, assuming the project can be successfully turned around, is to perhaps, in addition to some revenue sharing, have some revenue donated to breast cancer research. To truly enjoy them, we should keep them happy and healthy.
As already implied,
I mean,
many
that's
of
kind of
them cause video
endearing,
games,
right?
often an MMO,
Do something
but
good
just
with
as
the world
often,
while you make
like,
money.
just the concept of a video game? Okay, wait, let me word that another way. They will promise a video game. Like, that's the promise, in its entirety. No clues for genre, style, scope, engine, or platform, or
Just
how...
looking at this, it looks like collaboration with known figures, development, research. Like, these are all buzzwords that are used in a lot of crypto projects. You just have to be careful. Like, look at what's already been built and then judge based on that.
Any of the tokens would interact with it. Just a video game. If we sell 10,000 tokens for $300 each, we will start brainstorming development ideas for a video game. Now, all of these tend to be in collections of 10,000, and there's actually an interesting sort of quirk inside that. The initial format was to mint an entire collection and just shove them out onto the market. The cap comes into play purely because you have to tell the program generating the garbage when to stop. However, as the scheme started to take off and competition rose, it became obvious that this was a sucker's way of doing it because that meant paying gas fees on everything up front. So someone came up with a system for minting a random output on demand, which shuffles the mint cost off onto the buyer. From there, it all took off like wildfire. Very low upfront cost, extremely low risk, plus it turns the entire system into a gacha game with different rarity curves for attributes. At best, these are all obfuscated gambling schemes, at worst, active scams. And the payoff of failure makes it extremely difficult to parse one of those from the other. World of Wojak only sold 20 tokens to 11 people and still pocketed over $5,000. Pro Camel Riders sold 114 tokens to 71 buyers and took home $25,000. Metamon sold 722 of their 9999 tokens to 343 buyers and walked off with $211,000.
Yeah, like the amount of money that these
buy-in
projects
is over
cost is just crazy, right? Like, what other collectibles type project costs hundreds of dollars just to buy in, right, on launch? Crazy.
$350, the payday for failure makes it irrational to succeed. The interesting aspect of it all, though, is the emergent fiction of it. These smoke vendors don't have an actual product more complex than the output of a vending machine in the front of a grocery store, so they need a story to sell instead. And so we get this wave of poorly defined projects pitching a token with an attached JPEG that represents the concept of a thing that could become a future business. What that business does is unimportant, and indeed many of these projects, successful and otherwise, trade in a flattering myth of decentralization where the direction of the business, down to its fundamental product, is shunted into the indeterminate future to be decided later by collective consensus. Are we a comic book, a movie, a hedge fund, a casino,
This
or a
is an
bi-monthly...
interesting, the idea of like, imagine that Uber or Airbnb were owned by the drivers or the guests or the hosts, right? I feel like a lot of people would agree that if Uber was instead a co-op where drivers had a direct say in the decision making, it would be good for those drivers. And it would solve some of the problems of having these drivers' livelihoods being controlled by a smaller group of tech workers in San Francisco, right? And so I think that's what people are trying to address with these DAOs. And I hope he talks about that. I don't know if we're going to get into that. Oh yeah, I think so. But like the principle is interesting, right? But we'll see what he gets into.
Token holders to decide. All that matters is that whatever it is, it will definitely make the value of your tokens go up. So you should definitely buy too.
One thing I learned about NFTs, if you think something's going to be a blue chip, you should definitely buy at least two, because you're going to get one emotionally attached to one of them, and you're not going to want to sell it because NFTs are going to explode all over the world. And if you got a blue chip today, it's going to be incredibly more valuable in 5 years from now, or even 3 years from now, or even 2 years from now than it is today.
On
this guy just has like crazy eyes, right?
Or at least established brands
crazy
of people getting into NFTs, the results tend to be extremely tepid and insubstantial, even by the standards of NFTs. Very low risk, low quality, low engagement tokens shoveled out the door to capitalize on a hot buzzword, chasing the cash that's
I hate that all these corporations have done stuff like that.
Tied up in all this, there's an extremely pervasive resistance to any form of skepticism that ultimately manifests as a sort of toxic positivity. This is all part of a complex feedback loop. The projects, broadly speaking, lack any kind of substantial product, existing almost entirely as promises backed by nothing more than a screenshot of a roadmap and some sample PFPs. And again, I think it's really important to keep in mind that that goes for successful projects just as much as for rug pulls. There really isn't any meaningful difference between a Party Ape Billionaire Club and a Betting Kongs. Betting Kongs were never going to make a casino, even if they hadn't tanked, and despite the fact that they were running billboards in Times Square, PABC is never making an MMORPG. Both claims are equally ridiculous, but
I mean, I'm not aware of this project, but some projects like Bored Ape Yacht Club have really pushed things forward in the NFT space, whether or not you think that's good or not, or cool or not. They've done a lot of interesting things that they didn't have to do, but they actually said they were going to do, and then they did it. So I don't think you can just blanket say, and the thing is they have the money to actually make a video game. That's different than the project he was talking about, Party Ape Billionaire Club or whatever. But you can't just blanket say that none of these NFTs are going to accomplish anything. A small fraction of them will do something, and that will be the next wave, just like the internet in the 90s and early 2000s.
One of the two made a huge pile of money. The primary product is ultimately hype, which is both insubstantial and fickle.
Sure.
Negativity, both internal and external, can have a meaningful impact on the willingness of people to buy into a project. And if buyers are tepid, then you won't get a runaway sale. And if you don't get a runaway sale, then that's going to turn off buyers even more, which means the secondary market for tokens will likely fail to materialize. This is what makes enthusiasts so deeply unreliable. They have meaningful financial stakes in an intangible, volatile thing that exists entirely as a collective idioform, a story about a potential future outcome whose value is based entirely on public perception.
He's kind of talked about this a few times.
Because they're currently holding a hot potato. And as much as they insist that they just really, really enjoy the feeling of a burning hot potato in their hands, do they? Or are they just hoping that you'll catch it? This creates an environment of toxic positivity where doubt is aggressively policed by both project leaders.
Same thing for the Ponzi schemes. I'm looking at you, strong nodes. I'm looking at you.
Who have an obvious financial interest in hype since their big payday is the minting rush, and community members themselves who have a speculative financial interest in hype. While all of that is logical in the pure sense that there's an effect that can be explained by an incentive, the output is effectively a self-organizing high control group. Doubters are ostracized so aggressively that it chills all conversation about a project's actual viability. All concerns are just FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Questions that would be utterly banal in any other investment forum, what has the team done? What assets do they have? Why should anyone believe that they can deliver on their promises? Are treated as hostile. And the frank reality is because there aren't answers. Party Ape Billionaire Club is just as vaporous, and yet they superficially succeeded. So there's incentive to enforce the collective illusion. This is multiplied by an internal form of performative etiquette. Participants ritualistically wish each other good morning and good night, boiled down to the shorthand GM and GN. That seems like a small thing. There's nothing inherently suspicious about good morning or good night, but in observed practice, it's a very distinct ritual. Not merely a shibboleth, but a repetitive action that signals in-group membership and affirms loyalty on an ongoing basis. If you have diamond hands, it means you're willing to hold a token until some promised future.
Some of these like new vocabulary things that come out of crypto are just true in every case. Like look on any Twitch streamer, any video game community, they all have their own language, right? So it's not really like an exclusionary thing. It's more just like, oh, we're part of something that we're all. It's like a meme that it's literally a meme. That's what a meme means.
But you can't point that out, because that would be FUD. And if you're spreading FUD, then you're NGMI, not gonna make it.
True.
And making it, getting rich, is all that matters. HFSP, have fun staying
Yeah, that's
poor.
one of the dumbest
These are
crypto
synthesized
things.
into a no true Scotsman paradigm. The
Have fun
we
staying poor
in
is
we're
dumb.
all going to make it does not refer to we all. It refers to the select, the chosen, the diamond hands and the hodlers. Those who make it are clearly the we. And if you didn't make it...
Not necessarily true, because like we're gonna make it, I've seen used many times, probably most of the time, in like a we are all gonna make it, keep your head up kind of way, not just diamond hands.
You weren't. People who get angry about being scammed by a rug pull or by malware or by social engineering are berated and belittled for not following the crowd. This incubates a community trained to ignore warning signs and dismiss criticism, a community with internal language and customs that are explicitly incompatible with outside communications. Skepticism is FUD from non-believers who are trying to undermine the value of your assets and manipulate a crash or trick you into being a paper hands. It all maps onto narratives of sin and deception, a chosen few who are privileged with advanced knowledge about the promised land which they can achieve by holding strong to the rituals and expelling all doubt. The end product is a self-organizing high control group. And the results of that are obvious. There are still people convinced that somehow, someone is going to pick up the ashes of evolved apes and manifest the rest of the project, a belief based on no observable evidence.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that like a lot of people do get caught up in this kind of cultish mindset, right? It is true, and it is a problem with NFTs things, especially people who aren't able to financially kind of like withstand those things. Especially with NFTs, if you're investing in NFTs, it better be just completely play money. Can you guys hear anything? There we go. Come on.
All you're doing is shitting on Decentraland, bro. Yeah, I'm sorry you don't like to make money here in the network, but I wanted to talk on your Twitch stream, man. I probably could have brought a lot of people on there, and all you want to do is talk shit and ban people, man. You banned me instantly.
So the question then is, what do the tokens actually do? As mentioned before, the token itself is just a box that a bit of data can be put into. Now, this box is extremely small, to the point that even an average cell phone photograph is several times too large to fit. Due to the nature of the chain, updating software that's put onto the chain is both difficult and expensive. Complicated programs need to be broken up into multiple tokens each containing a smart contract that defines a portion of the whole, and all of these contracts need to interlink and reference each other, but with an eye towards the fact that each transaction that either computes or alters information requires paying processing fees. Only reading information is free. The process of fixing a bug in a smart contract basically amounts to minting a new copy of the contract and then jumping through some hoops to rename the old and new contract so that the new copy has the name that any other interacting contracts are looking for, paying fees for just about every step of that process.
True.
This creates a very funny catch-22 where on one hand is the insistence that the NFTs that end users buy are potentially extremely powerful, able to be miniature self-governing applets that exist in a web of like applets, and on the other hand is a large stack of incentives to put as little into them as possible. For an example of the pitfalls, Wolf Game was a somewhat popular NFT-based gambling game that bragged about being hosted entirely on-chain at great expense. Everything from the pixel art wolves and sheep to the game's code was stored on Ethereum. The idea behind the game is that users would mint a character token which had a 90% chance of being a sheep and a 10% chance of being a wolf, with a finite supply of wolves and sheep available. The important thing here is that the character tokens weren't just a bit of art and a serial number, but tiny programs that allowed users to perform interactions like staking. The problem is that their code was full.
Yeah, so like NFTs can be programmable, they can be pieces of code, right? So it is, you can do more interesting things like they're doing with this game. I guess it didn't
with multiple bugs, and since some of those bugs were contained in the character tokens, they were replicated across all 13,809 minted tokens. A glitchy token can't be patched. It must be replaced.
This is
so
a
the
big
Wolf Game
problem
devs were
with
forced
crypto,
to not only
crypto
redeploy
anyway.
all their contracts,
And
but
actually
attempt to
happened
remint
with
and distribute identical copies of
CryptoPunks.
every token generated.
If you look up CryptoPunks V1 and V2.
Given the risks inherent in putting functionality inside the token itself and the high cost of interaction, the most common application is to use external systems to simply check for possession of a token. This is where we introduce another player into the ecosystem, wallet managers like MetaMask. In a few short years, the system has already grown so bloated and difficult to interact with that it's become necessary to develop middleware applications that simplify the process of generating wallets, switching wallets, and mediating.
That's like a weird way to phrase it. That it's not that it's become more bloated, it's just become easier to use because of these providers. People are just building tools. Just like when you were connecting to the internet, like browsers sucked and then they've gotten a lot better. So I don't see that as because there was a problem. It's just getting better overall.
Key that makes it all work. They solve the single sign-on problem, allowing your web browser to simply know that it's you who is using it, automatically negotiating permissions based on relevant tokens. It's your login, your credit card, your Steam profile, and your bank account all rolled into a single point of contact, making interaction with Web3, the internet of the future, frictionless. From another point of view, it's a massive point of failure that contains so much information, so many permissions, so much of worth, that it becomes an extremely obvious point of attack, manufactured by idiots who claim to be building a security product in 2021 that doesn't obfuscate key phrases within the UI or use two-factor authentication. Remember, again, that these people want to put...
But the thing is, they do obfuscate key phrases within the UI, and they don't use two-factor authentication because all of the data on MetaMask is stored on your device. So somebody, unlike your Gmail account or something, someone would need access to your physical device in order to access MetaMask. It's an encrypted file on your device. And not having the two-factor authentication is actually enabling this more secure feature, right? So it's a misrepresentation of what they're doing.
Medical records, driver's licenses, professional accreditations, and real estate deeds into their system. They should not be trusted. The entire market is absolutely lousy with scams and has been since...
MetaMask isn't the only wallet provider, but we're getting back into this stuff where what he's saying just isn't really making sense. Like maybe you don't want to trust one thing, but MetaMask's whole system is built so that you don't really have to trust them. It's software that's compartmentalized to your computer. All of those files, everything is stored on your own computer.
Bitcoin first gained any traction. Every single scam structure imaginable has been dusted off and redeployed into this explicitly unregulated market where victims are largely without recourse. These range from institutional scams like Ponzi schemes, pump and dumps, and insider trading, to middleweight scams like gold brick and wash trading, to grittier scams like phishing and sending fake links. Pump and dumps in particular are conducted in broad daylight. Since it's not illegal, it's just against the terms of service of the exchanges that you use to do it. So the worst case scenario is you burn your account. They'll straight up walk you through the process of doing a pump and dump, no code words, diagrams, and everything. They're notable as they're actually a two-headed scam because, you see, you might get recruited onto the pump half of the scheme, or you might think you're being recruited to pump, but you're actually
avoid
the dump.
any kind
As
of
already
pump,
mentioned,
small
blockchain
cap
is
token,
resilient
just
to
invest in
direct
real
man-in-the-middle
projects.
attacks where someone tries to inject bad data straight into the chain, but man-in-the-middle attacks are rare. In an environment like cryptocurrency, with few, if any, repercussions for misbehavior that stays within the cryptosphere, man-in-the-middle attacks are wholly unnecessary. Why try to brute force your bad data onto the chain when you can trick someone into giving you access to their wallet, then transfer all their stuff out?
Never ever share your private keys.
Becomes a self-rewarding bug bounty, where the payout is whatever apes and coins you can grab before anyone notices. And that's not even touching on the subject of malware. Smart contracts are just code. They're software. There's no reason they can't be viruses or worms. The primary limitation is processing power. But also, it's a virus that someone can drop directly into your bankless bank account and just wait for you to activate it. And yeah, that's right. There's no offer/confirmation step in sending tokens back and forth. Someone who knows your wallet can just drop stuff right into it. So, pin that somewhere in your brain.
What he's saying doesn't really make sense. People cannot drop a virus into your wallet. That's dumb. There are smart contracts that are dangerous, and I actually go over this in a video on how to protect your crypto. When you're interacting with a smart contract, you can grant specific permissions to that smart contract. So if you are wanting to exchange 10 tokens, right, for something on a contract that looks like a crypto exchange, only grant them access to those 10 tokens that you're exchanging right then. Because nefarious contracts can drain your entire crypto wallet if you grant them access to everything. But you have to actually grant permission for this to happen. So yeah, check out my crypto security video. But this idea that, I feel like he's just targeting people who don't know enough about how this works to say, oh yeah, someone can just drop something. Someone can send you random tokens, but they can't like access your other funds and drop a virus into your wallet, you know?
The best part about this is that the whole ecosystem operates on a strict assumption that possession is ownership and access is permission, which is absolutely buck wild coming from software developers who claim to be very concerned with system security. If someone tricks you into sending them your Bored Ape, it's now theirs.
True.
The only mechanism in the machine for parsing legitimate transactions from illegitimate transactions is the consensus mechanism, which is only concerned with whether or not the transactions followed the rules of the software. The only illegitimacy it recognizes are people trying to insert fake data. When you are tricked into doing something, all of the mechanics of what follows are, by the rules of the system, legitimate. It's a legal transfer. More relevant, however, is the sheer
lots of
density of
scams.
these
You have to be
scams.
careful.
The one market that cryptocurrency has successfully disrupted is the market of fraud. Think of it this way. A big population of people have willingly self-identified that they have substantial disposable income, poor judgment, low social literacy, a high tolerance for nonsensical risk, and are highly persuadable. People who fall victim to these scams have basically no options other than taking to social media and attempting to whip up enough of a frenzy that they can convince marketplaces like OpenSea to act as de facto censors by delisting stolen tokens. There's no authority you can report them to that has the power to return your tokens.
That is a
The best
huge
you can hope
danger of
for
crypto.
is denying the scammers profit on their incredibly low-cost operation. If your business is tricking people out of their money, you would be a fool if you didn't take the opportunity. Not only have participants advertised their susceptibility to incoherent promises of future returns, the immutable structure of the chain, the persistence of data, and the ease with which that data can be collated means that for scammers, it's extremely easy to
It is like a huge playground for scammers, and anyone getting into crypto, I think this is something that will develop over time, is more knowledge on how to prevent yourself from getting scammed. Because every time you join a Discord channel, there are scam bots that will start trying to scam you.
And that's a pretty good segue into talking about privacy issues. A low-trust environment is also a low-privacy environment. Anything you do on a blockchain is, by design, accessible to everyone who knows how to navigate the data. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that the opposite of how it's supposed to work?
It's actually
I
not.
thought crypto was all anonymous.
I think the anonymous thing was something that was like foisted upon crypto by the people that were trying to say it was all terrorists and drug dealers, right? It's actually good because there's transparency, and there have been so many cases where people are trying to, like, institutions or people with followings try and scam their people, and you can actually see where the money goes. So imagine if you had access to all of a big bank's transaction records, right? You can actually see, it shines a light on all of these dirty things that are happening. So dirty things still happen in crypto, but you can actually see them. It's not happening behind closed doors.
So, yes, crypto is anonymous by default. There's no inherent requirement for proof of identity, and in fact, numerous applications that would benefit from a stricter one-to-one correlation between accounts and people struggle with this. On forums and social media, it's called sock puppeting. In crypto, it's called a Sybil attack, where users are able to generate numerous alternate identities by creating additional accounts or wallets. The epidemic of wash trading on OpenSea relies on the ability to pretend you're several different people as you buy apes from yourself for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rather than anonymous, this is pseudonymous. Everyone can see what wallets and contracts your wallet interacts with based off the long hash addresses like this, but that hash is only implicitly connected to your identity based on circumstantial connections. Of course, a big circumstantial connection would be something like registering with a crypto-based social auction platform that intrinsically connects the two. This makes it pretty easy to see that Lena Morris, overly attached girlfriend, paid $153 on March 31st to mint the overly attached girlfriend NFT, followed by a $205 reserve on April 2nd to list the NFT on Foundation. Ethereum whale Farzen Farden Fard then bought the token on April 3rd for 200 Ethereum, 30 of which went to Foundation, with Lena getting the remaining 170, which she transferred into USD using the exchange service Kraken.
Yeah, this is all true. I feel like people don't realize that these transactions are so public. There's an interesting project called Secret Network that's working on more anonymous smart contracts. But this is just a known limitation or benefit of the system, depending on how you look at
Kyle
it.
Craven minted several other tokens, but for the most part just split the Ethereum from the initial sale into two separate holding wallets where it's sat untouched since. You don't need to be some super hacker to figure this stuff out. It's all publicly available. That's the entire point of the system. And in another feature not bug arrangement, remember, nothing can be deleted from the blockchain without tremendous effort. Now, that's fine if the blockchain only contains a contextually relevant log of transactions. There are absolutely contexts where that level of transparency is desirable, but that falls apart when you start talking about using the blockchain itself as the storage medium for, like, an entire social network. Blockchain-based social network Scuttlebutt seems tacitly aware that this is a bad idea, like somewhere inside their human brains they recognize that it might be a mistake to make it impossible to remove things from the system when they warn users that anyone willing to dig can surface any old usernames, photos, and bios, but that doesn't actually give them pause. So,
to be
if someone
fair,
posts,
like
say,
on the internet, there's the Wayback Machine where you can go back and pull up some old
child
stuff.
abuse imagery, revenge porn, your home address, intimate details of your private life.
But
There's
yeah,
just
you want to be
nothing
able
you
to
can really
delete
do about
stuff.
that. If you mistakenly overshare, post some information that maybe you shouldn't have, it's already too late. You can try to hide it, but you can't delete it. Remember that if someone knows your wallet address, they can just put tokens directly into it. As alluded, there's a whole scam where you drop someone an NFT that lifts the art from who cares, somewhere, but the smart contract is malicious code that drains their wallet if they ever interact with it to move it, sell it, stake it, burn it. It just becomes a landmine sitting in their wallet forever.
Yo, this is fake, this is fake, this is fake, this is fake. They popped up in my wallet, I clicked on it to delete it. Immediately they stole 19 grand. Happily, I just started this wallet, but they already stole 19,000 out of it. Need fucking help immediately.
Even on the non-malware side of things, people have already been using this to dump promotional tokens into the wallets of celebrities and influencers.
So what's actually happened in those situations is you have to see what you're giving contract access to. So those people, they gave their contract access to all of their funds in their wallet, but they didn't have to do that to transfer it, right? But what happened is they didn't read the thing that came up and what they were giving permission to. So always make sure you know what you're giving permission to when you interact with a smart contract.
You know, dick pics are an any second now kind of thing, right? Oh, look, I minted a photo of your front door and dropped it directly into your wallet. And you can't just, like, delete it. You need to actively send it somewhere and pay gas fees to do so. Revolutionary new vectors in harassment. The end product here is a massive power imbalance that's baked into the fabric of how you engage with this new world order. Users who engage with the system authentically as themselves expose vast swaths of information about themselves and their activities, while users who engage disingenuously are empowered in their ability to deceive, defraud, and disappear. A lot of this rhetoric stems from a pretty deep failure to understand what a central authority really is, or that you can decentralize data storage while centralizing data. Ethereum is ultimately a central platform, and the fact that a few dozen people need to sign off on every major change before it can be implemented is largely meaningless and symbolic. With the validation network,
that's just not really true. Ethereum is extremely dispersed,
ultimately sitting
including
somewhere
the
between
validators.
consortium and cartel. Every large platform has multiple internal and external stakeholders that form a consensus about the direction of the platform. Windows is not a single-minded monolith. Apple issues voting shares. Google is basically a hydra. While the network of Ethereum miners and validators are not a formal corporation, yet, there's no mechanism in existence that compels them to act in the interest of users.
That yet doesn't make any sense. Like, they will never be a formal corporation. Like, he's just throwing stuff in there to, like, get people riled up, but that's not even close to a possibility.
Really poor and disempowered users where those interests conflict with their own. The movement of Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake has been vaporware in no small part because the validators simply choose not to. Because proof of work, volatility, and high gas fees benefit them in the here and now, while proof of stake and low gas fees...
That's also absolutely not true. As a specific counterexample, EIP 1559 basically made it much less profitable to be an Ethereum miner, and the miners did not want this to happen, but the community did, and it happened, right? The reason that Ethereum, the proof of stake, hasn't happened yet is because it's just taking longer to develop. Like, name any project, whether it's construction of a house or whatever, that happens at the exact same amount of time. It's not because people who are financially benefiting from it are controlling the decisions.
Only
He's just
benefit them
making
in a
that up.
hypothetical future. Because these extremely obvious pitfalls are what you get when you let guys like Vitalik Buterin and Elon Musk design the future. The sole
Definitely not in the same category, Vitalik Buterin and Elon Musk. But anyway.
protection for users of Ethereum is that the system is so cumbersome that all but the most egregious breaches aren't worth addressing. Of course, that in truth means that only the wealthy have access to justice within the system. If you take all these different things, all these parts of your identity, all your economic activity, all the video games you play, all the groups you join, and stick them into one system, that's a central system. It doesn't matter how many different servers that system spans or how many validators need to agree before changes can be made. You've pooled all that data in one place. The proposed Web3 crypto-driven future of the internet is a privacy disaster. This is why I find MetaMask...
These are some like really interesting points, and I think over the next few years we'll see more education on the subject, but it is a privacy disaster. If you're not careful about what you're interacting with, Like, for example, lots of influencers have gotten caught promoting NFT scams because all their addresses are public. And when someone has an NFT that they proudly display, you can see what address that NFT belongs to. And if you have any other transactions on that NFT wallet, then people can see those transactions. So if you ever buy an NFT, make sure it's in a different wallet than your actual financial wallet.
Mask horrifying as a product. It's a bucket that's asking you to pour unfathomable amounts of data and permissions into it. It's such a tremendous and monumental point of failure.
This guy doesn't really understand MetaMask because it's a localized thing, right? It's like an open source program that you're running on your computer. MetaMask doesn't have access to any of your specific data. That's all stored locally on your computer.
This is where NFTs really bloom into their final form. The primary use case of tokens beyond speculation ultimately is to function as access passes. From a web engineering perspective, imagine tokens that are the mother of all cookies and consider a tracking token that users don't just willingly associate themselves with, but enthusiastically drag with them from device to device, ensuring a continuity of tracking across all web activity. The future version of
unfortunately, this already happens
by financialized tokens is a dystopia.
Different
it's a
pixels
technology
and
that's built
Facebook
to
and
turn
stuff.
everything
They're already
into money,
tracking
to
you
treat
everywhere
every
you
corner
go.
of our social existence as a marketplace, to attach an abstract representative token to everything from video games to labor unions. Now, proponents of Web3 will disagree with this assessment, particularly the claim that cryptocurrency is endemic to Web3 and the two are intractable, but that's the practical reality of the situation. Every substantial project branding itself under the banner of Web3 is strapped to the side of a blockchain, be it issuing governance tokens or relying on the chain's smart contract layer or requiring possession of a cryptocurrency in order to pay the processing fees that are mandatory in order to participate. They are, at this point, philosophically and technologically entwined. Less accessible, less free, less interesting, and substantially more expensive, Web3 is the vanguard of a million paywalls and oppressive, code-enforced DRM schemes sold to idealists as a decentralized system where they, and not wealthy stakeholders, have the power. I see tremendous blind spots in a community that has spent so long focusing on the hype of an untenable fantasy metaverse where they're the ones cowing corporations with immutable ownership, guaranteeing their ability to resell video game horse armor, that they failed to consider that the enforcement of ownership can and will be used against them if and when corporations decide to leverage their power in the space. The fantasy amongst evangelists is that a tokenized economy where digital goods are mediated by NFTs would give them more power. Goods like digital games would have true ownership, encapsulated in the ability to be resold, but there is no reason to believe that this is how things would shake out. The far more probable result is that the tokens are used to lock products down.
So this actually has shaken out in this way, right? If you look at some of the successful DeFi projects, they have had extremely community-driven votes, like Uniswap, right? It's true that a lot of the voting power is held by the original founding team, but the community votes on different proposals and introduces different proposals. So the board functions more as like this democratic initiative than just 5 people in a room, right? And Uniswap, like these new decentralized autonomous organizations might replace corporations in the future. In the case of Uniswap, it could have been a private company, right? But it's not. It's this open board that allows people to vote on things. And they're doing as much they're a crypto exchange, and they're doing as much transaction volume on certain token pairs as Coinbase. And they're bigger than a lot of the big crypto exchanges.
Even tighter. The Squid
So it's
Game
not really a
token
pipe
scam is
dream.
illustrative here. In early November 2021, a new meme token popped out styled after the hit Netflix show Squid Game. Over the course of about a week, the price of the token was pumped from a few cents to just under $3,000 US. Estimates are that the Squid developers took in about $3.38 million before cashing out their holdings, deleting their socials, and vanishing into thin air. A classic rug pull, but the truly transcendental detail is that it left buyers with not merely a useless token, but a token that couldn't be sold at all. Built into Squid was a requirement that in order to transfer or
Yeah,
sell
this
the
was
token,
actually
a
hilarious
corresponding
and very
number-
sad at the same time.
One of the most common combos that people do when they...
But in general, whenever there's something that happens and then a new token comes out, just don't buy. It's so easy to make a token, right? Don't just buy random tokens. They're not worth anything inherently.
He spent at the same time. The hitch was that marbles were never available. No rules were broken in this scam, and indeed the Squid tokens do exactly what they say they do. If you have the appropriate amount of marbles tokens, you can absolutely transfer or sell your Squid. Just good luck getting any. A game developer can, in any of myriad ways, deliver on a truly owned digital token that is rendered untradeable in practice, and all by playing by the rules. Rules must always be evaluated for their power to oppress. This is a blind spot to crypto enthusiasts because they just assume that they're the early adopters, they're the ones who will have power, they're the ones who will get to set the rules, and they're the ones who will do the oppressing. Consider that any token that can be used to grant access can also be used to revoke it. Like, let's say that I create a hangout spot in one of the metaverse contender platforms, Decentraland, and we call it the Ahigao Alpaca Oasis. The Oasis has a backroom that only allows registered players to enter, meaning you need to have your MetaMask linked to Decentraland in order to get in. This type of gate is typically used to create VIP areas, places where only people who hold a specific token or class of token can enter. Only people with official Ahigao alpacas can enter. But as is well known within the lore of the metaverse, the Ahigao alpacas have long been at war with the Bored Ape Yacht Club, so rather than checking for an alpaca token, I check for ape tokens and then forbid entrance. Or maybe I just make my game artificially more difficult for them, or inflate my prices. Now imagine that instead of running a hangout spot in a video game, that I'm a decentralized finance
That's an interesting point. I haven't really thought about that, where you could just build platforms that are specifically exclusionary rather than inclusionary. So yeah, I haven't really seen that happen, but it is interesting.
Giving out mortgages in cryptocurrency, and I scour your transaction history for donations to the NAACP as part of my risk assessment protocol. Imagine that
It is worth noting that this already exists on places like Reddit, where some subreddits will automatically ban you if you've posted in other subreddits that they disagree with, especially the political ones. So this isn't like, again, this is humans being humans, not crypto being a problem in itself or a solution in itself.
Is able to track unionization efforts in real time because the union is issuing governance tokens on a publicly auditable blockchain. The belief that the world will be fairer if the rules are enshrined in code enforced by computers and made extremely difficult to change or circumvent is laughable. It's not merely naive, but categorically ahistoric. This is where a lot of my resistance comes from. You can create specialized crypto chains that have a negligible environmental impact, but the force of that model is culturally destructive. The current system sucks, but this is just a worse version of the current system.
I think that's like a nuanced take, right? Because some things might be worse, but some things might be better. So if you could offload the things that would be better into crypto and keep the things that would be worse in the real non-crypto world, then that would be better for society as a whole, wouldn't it?
Even stop there. It's tokens all the way down.
This game has a good high barrier of entry, so most people can't do it unless they have what's called a scholarship, where someone essentially pays for their barrier of entry to allow them to play the game, and then they can split the profits afterwards.
Like, okay, Axie Infinity is a so-called play-to-earn video game.
A lot of play-to-earn games, I should probably make a video on this, are kind of Ponzi-ish in nature, just so you know.
But because Ethereum is too slow and expensive to interact with directly, the developers, Sky Mavis, created a side chain called Ronin, which consists of a governance currency called AXS, the game character tokens called Axies, and the in-game currency called Smooth Love Potions, or SLP. All of these components are built to function as money because that's what the machine is built to do. The so-called play-to-earn model is a great case study in what the end result of the crypto ecosystem actually looks like. Axie Infinity gets a lot of credulous coverage from the press because a handful of people in the Philippines are able to make a marginal living by playing the game and flipping their SLP, which lets Sky Maven turn around and pretend that they're a humanitarian organization and not a for-profit business who makes money off all the people rushing to buy a team of Axies, believing that they can get paid just for playing. Now, real quick, Axie Infinity is a lightweight card-based PvP game where players fight with a team of 3 critters called Axies. It's a bit Pokemon and a bit Slay the Spire. Axies have randomized attributes and are all tokenized, so if you sell an Axie, you're selling that specific Axie. Smooth Love Potions are used to breed Axies and thus form the basis of the economy, as they are fungible relative to the Axies themselves. Matches are either ranked or unranked, but only ranked matches entered using energy, which recharges every day, can earn SLP. The amount of energy you have to work with depends on the number of Axies in your wallet and ranges from 20 to 60. Additionally, higher ranked matches are worth more SLP. More SLP means a bigger stable of Axies, which means more energy to play matches, more flexibility within the metagame, better team compositions, and baseline better stats, enabling easier wins. So the difference in earning potential between higher and lower ranked accounts is pretty substantial. What coverage tends to note and then quickly move on from is the fact that the game is extremely expensive to onboard, costing hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, I think I'm going to skip this play to earn section just because I feel like I have less value to add to critique it. But basically, it's expensive to jump into Axie Infinity. Like at this point, I think it might be hundreds or if not thousands of dollars. It's interesting because a bunch of people in the Philippines started playing the game early, and a lot of people were actually able to get in early enough to actually make money. But unless a play-to-earn game is creating real value in itself, as in people really enjoy playing the game, then it's a Ponzi scheme. Because if people are only playing with the idea that they can make money in the future without actually enjoying the game, it's a Ponzi scheme where people are jumping in. But some games, obviously, people pay memberships to play. And if the entry cost of buying a character or whatever was just the cost for it to be like a fun game to play, just like buying a video game like you used to do instead of paying subscription, then it might actually be valuable. But from what I understand, most play-to-earn games now are Ponzi-ish in nature and require more people to buy in for you to not lose money. And there also haven't been as many fun ones yet.
I think the thing that normies don't get about NFT bros is their dedication, the staggering volume of capital they already control, and how deeply rooted they are in the culture of the people who operate the platforms we all use every day. And that alone is a good reason for people to pay attention. They have a lot of money and a lot of clout that they can use to try and make fetch happen. This is something of a splitting point. Basically, the future shakes out in one of two broad ways. One is that some new technological buzzword comes along and blockchain and Web3 lose their sway over investors, the stream of new buyers dries up, and the early investors cash out as best they can, popping the whole bubble. The other is that they're successful, and cryptocurrency is able to crowbar its way into enough corners of our lives that it becomes unavoidable. We're all forced in some way to maintain a crypto wallet, to manage whatever coins and tokens become necessary for participation in society, providing early investors with a captive audience and steady flow of capital. To quote German socio-technologist Jürgen Guter, better known by his online alias Tante, there are parts of your digital life that currently you can't really sell, but that's what they want to change. Everything needs to be bought and sold. Everything is just a vehicle for more speculation. The reason they want you to be able to resell your access token to some service instead of buying or renting it like today is to create even more markets for speculation, and the smart contracts can be set up in a way that
really buy
every
this as
quarter
a fundamental motivation.
The claims that this technology
behind these
facilitates an
things.
immutable ledger of ownership is itself largely hollow posturing, even from within the ecosystem. Remember that most of the actual things being referenced are not contained within the chains themselves because the chains are too slow, restrictive, and bad at their job to actually store media, and because many of the things being sold are purely ephemeral. The IPFS address for any given media token can be effortlessly minted onto another competing chain, or even the same chain. That's not even right-click saving, that's referencing the exact same media. Why is the token on Ethereum more authoritative than the token on Tezos or Cardano or Solana or Ergo or Celo or Binance or Algorand or Polkadot or EOS or Tron or VeChain or Ethereum Classic or...
One thing I find interesting is that, like, I don't really follow him for it, but he's pronouncing the names of a lot of these things wrong. And that just shows me that he hasn't listened to like all the interviews and podcasts and stuff, right? Like they were doing mostly like textual research, which is interesting because I feel like a lot of the motivations that he's attributing to the crypto community are false, right?
Or Phantom or Stellar or Stacks or Neo or Waves or Hollow or Link or Radix or Harmony or Oasis or Icon or Secret or Iota or Crown or Terra or Omni or Enigma or Elastos or Edgeware or Bytem or Fuse or Gather. If a chain hard forks, which version of your stuff is the real one? Bitcoin is itself mired in a turf war between Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin SV. The myth of immutable ownership governed by these systems is predicated on a monolithic
It's actually
victory.
not Bitcoin won the turf war, but that's just an example of the community deciding. This is like a feature, right? Where if the community wants to make a change, then they can make that change. And then the people who want to make that change will just run with it. And so it's good for deciding disagreements, right?
In reality, your NFTs within the Ethereum ecosystem are ultimately just as trapped, sandboxed, and meaningless as your Steam trading cards. You'll hear about protocols like Polygon that aim to let you move stuff from chain to chain, but that's sleight of hand. You can't remove something from a chain, so all they really do is create a new token at the destination and add a note to the bottom of the original token that says, "I'm currently somewhere else, please don't move or sell me." It's an ask that's governed by smart contracts, so vulnerable to bad coding. In video game terms, they would be immediately hammered looking for item duplication glitches, a vulnerability that's basically inevitable in a mass adoption scenario. It's a system that is at once impenetrable and brittle, and that arrangement disproportionately empowers the
Like,
dishonest.
okay, so some of he's kind of right in that when you have a wrapped token, like for example, a native Ethereum token, if you're trading it on Solana, then it is just kind of sitting somewhere and not being moved. Cross-token bridges are dangerous. Vitalik talks about this. But with Ethereum L2s, they don't have these same kinds of vulnerabilities, right?
One of the complications is that it's basically impossible to extricate the digital scarcity concepts of NFTs from cryptocurrency and the core philosophies that cryptocurrency was built from. One rose out of the other, and they are basically forever entwined. One of the ironies of all this is that any legitimate artistic or anti-capitalist uses of the underlying technology are contingent on the tech remaining niche. On a very basic level, the systems just suck, being slow, difficult to use, and generally oblique. For the most part, to the degree that they're usable at all, it is largely at the mercy of only having a few users. There are blockchains that are reasonably responsive and reasonably cheap because they're not popular. Hickednunce is a well-regarded art market on the Tezos blockchain. Transaction fees and deflation are at the moment relatively minimal, and thus a lot of the transactions are able to operate in the range of $5 to $20. But that state exists by the grace of being 45th in popularity, just high enough to actually have users, but not high enough to have attracted too many bots. If Tezos...
It's not... The arguments just aren't really convincing at this point. Where there are more popular networks, much more popular networks, that have lower transaction fees. So it doesn't make sense.
As they say, to the moon, then that all changes. Users adopt the platform disproportionate to the scale of validators, the value of Tez skyrockets, and the actual marketplace of people using Hickednunce experience hyperdeflation, where hoarders are rewarded handsomely and buyers are punished.
Okay, we need to pause here for a moment because this is actually really important, but absurdly complex, like textbook length subject matter, so here's the short version. Deflation is counterintuitive because the line is going up, which makes it look like a good thing, but it's only good if you already have the currency in hand. As the purchasing power of a currency increases, typically because cash gets more scarce, the cost of goods and labor goes down. A deflationary economy punishes buying things, as anything that you buy today will inevitably be cheaper to buy in the future. If you need to buy things that aren't financial assets, things that don't appreciate in value, like food, clothing, rent, vehicles, transit fare, you screw yourself over. This is hyperdeflation, and
this
it's
is
not
true,
only
but you can
designed
buy things in US dollars using USDC on OpenSea. So, like,
by their creators and evangelists. This is what going to the moon means. Now let's talk about unions.
Using tokens to verify union membership and participate in union activities relies on the tech being oblique enough that union busters and their clients...
For the record,
don't
I've
see it
never
as a
heard
meaningful
anybody talk about unions in crypto. Co-ops in crypto are one thing, but using unions, like labor unions, and having a cryptocurrency associated with that, I've never ever heard that before in crypto, and I'm all over crypto. So I'm curious about it.
To monitor. Also, that ship has already sailed. Union busters and gig economy evangelists love crypto. They love DeFi and they love smart contracts and they love NFTs. And why wouldn't they? It's an environment that demolishes consumer protections and transfers tremendous amounts of explicit power to the wealthy.
Another jab.
In a lot of ways, this is all just a system for deferring trust onto machines and pretending that there aren't humans on the other end. And if there's one thing that union busters love, it's the prospect of an unbreakable individual contract whose inequities can all be blamed on a machine. The current state of the web, concentrated in a few mega platforms, is the result of compounding complexity. We used to have a web where anyone could learn to write a web page in HTML in an afternoon. It's just writing text and then using tags to format the text. But over time, people, understandably, wanted the web to do more, to look better. And so the things that were possible expanded via scripting languages that allowed for dynamic, interactive content. Soon, the definition of what a website was and looked like sailed out of reach of casual users and eventually even out of reach of all but the most dedicated hobbyists. It became the domain of specialists, so casual users, excluded by complexity, moved to templates, services, and platforms. This process gradually concentrated a critical mass of users into a handful of social media platforms. Already, even within the space, new hegemons are forming. Tremendous amounts of capital and power are concentrating in corporations like Consensus, who own MetaMask, and Animoca Brands, who have wide and deep investment in crypto gaming. OpenSea, the at-present dominant marketplace for tokens on a couple different chains, is filling the power roles users need. While the chain itself is in theory the arbiter of truth, nothing prevents people from filling the chain with lies, and so arises a demand for not merely a chain parser, a service that enables users to interact with the chain, but an interpreter of the chain. Motivational speaker and easy mark Calvin Becerra claimed to have lost 3 Bored Ape Yacht Club tokens to a social engineering scam. In reaction to this, he took to Twitter to whip up a mob that could pressure OpenSea and 2 other marketplaces into flagging the tokens as stolen and blocking them from being sold. Calvin was eventually able to resecure his tokens by paying a ransom because that's really all you can do, and he doesn't seem to consider that from the perspective of the thieves, that's an entirely desirable outcome. They won. Their plan worked. This happens all the time. Bored Ape members are particularly susceptible targets of fraud owing to their specific combination of greed and low social literacy. Looking to avoid paying platform fees and royalties,
Yeah,
many
scams
of
are
them
big.
moved off OpenSea to
You
doing
gotta
transactions on a
protect
shady
yourself.
little
You gotta
platform
learn
called
about them.
NFT Trader, which allowed scammers to run a very simple link swap scam and steal at least a dozen different ape tokens in the span of a couple days. The meat of Calvin's incident is the way in which the platforms that interact with the chain are being
The good news about
deputized by
scams
users
in crypto compared to scams in the real world is that it's actually, like, for example, Bitfinex, a big crypto exchange, was hacked years ago, and they just found those scammers trying to launder that money. Because bringing crypto, because it's infinitely trackable, bringing crypto from crypto money, cryptocurrency, into actual real money and going through a bank account to do that, usually there are some steps where you're required to identify yourself. And in the case of these hackers, the US government was able to find them. And so, especially with NFTs, if an NFT is stolen, then the person who stole it will always have, it's hard to, it's like art, right? If a famous painting, if the Mona Lisa is stolen tomorrow, anyone buying the Mona Lisa, the only people they can sell to are people who are willing to buy a stolen product and just like hang it up in their secret lair or something. It's the same thing with NFTs, where if you can mark that as being a stolen product, people will know, and there are ways that you can, prevent it from being sold, like what OpenSea does.
To be the de facto authority, not on what the chain says, but what the chain means. It is just a recreation of existing power structures within the new environment.
True, super true. Yeah, it's like crypto does not solve every single problem, right? That doesn't mean that it doesn't solve any problems. And my main critique of this video is that he hasn't talked about this problems that it actually is solving. DAOs. Let's talk about DAOs.
Relevant tokens on a given blockchain, and it's also the underlying software that executes relevant operations. And that's kind of really about it. So just to be very clear here, a conceptual DAO consists of three things: people, a digital machine built of smart contracts, and a token that allows the people to interact with the machine. In practice, most things that call themselves DAOs don't have the machine at all, and a substantial number either don't have the token or only have the token. The upside of a DAO is that it makes it easy-ish to create a formal organization at theoretically any scale, from only a couple people to a massive pool of stakeholders.
True.
And the program layer makes it possible to automate certain activities and the results. If the organization votes via the DAO interface, the results of that vote are automatically recorded and potentially executed. Though that framing is misleading. As with tokens themselves, there's no inherent functionality in a DAO. It's just a box that code goes into. I might as well be referring to all the things you could do with a web page. As
True,
already mentioned,
which is
many
actually cool.
organizations
Lots of
presenting
potential
themselves as a DAO have
opportunities.
no machine functionality at all. It's pretty standard to find a DAO that has issued a governance token, the script that's used for voting, with the systems to actually use that token being placed somewhere in the nebulous future of the roadmap. That open-endedness is actually important
True,
because
but
while the
you
claim
gotta
is that
remember
these
that
machines
they're
will further democratize
super
the
new
internet, the
technologies.
technical complexity that they add, the new specialized programming expertise that they require, concentrates a lot of power in the hands of people who can build the templates that in turn enable non-programmers to actually use it. It's just laying the seeds for the future recreation of the status quo. The Facebook, Google, Amazon-dominated internet arose because the technical cost of building a modern website rose far beyond what the vast majority of amateurs could manage. So everyone moved to templates and then to services and finally to platforms. This doesn't even reset the clock on that. The technical cost of creating a DAO is already far beyond any casual amateur, in part because all of this is being built by programmers and in part because of the state.
So in some senses, what he just talked about is that things got harder to build a website, right? But before, to build a website or to build an app, you would have to set up your own physical servers, etc. And with DAO, that's the current stage that they're in. So even though people who build their own websites now are using a more abstracted version that depends on these tech giants, they are able to do much more things, and we've seen a lot more innovation just in the world in general by people being able to do this. So hopefully that will
The
come
only
for
thing this
DAOs.
stuff is truly good for is managing on-chain assets. A DAO program can see the state of the chain and interact with it, so the DAO humans can vote on what should happen to those assets, and then the DAO program can automatically act on the results. But that raises the stakes. Because a DAO can see and interact directly with on-chain assets, there's the risk that via bad programming or unforeseen exploits, a malicious actor can use a DAO to access all kinds of stuff. The risk is directly proportional to the value of the assets kept on-chain. And remember, again, that evangelists want to put everything on-chain. The
Not
hilarious
true.
thing is that this has already played out once before. In fact, it played out with the first DAO ever built, called the DAO. This whole story unfolds over the course of 3 months in 2016.
So it's worth noting that in 2016, crypto was extremely niche, right? Extremely niche. Very few people owned crypto. Even fewer people interacted with smart contracts at that point, right? The DAO was basically the very first widely or moderately adopted smart contract. And there really wasn't anything else going on at that time.
From April to June. The DAO was an Ethereum-based venture capital fund that aimed to use code to create an investment firm without a conventional management structure or board of directors. A scheme that's positioned as lightweight and reducing bureaucratic overhead, but really it just translated to an attempt at minimizing human liability for the actions and behaviors of the fund. This unparalleled expression of
Doesn't make
greed
any
made the
sense.
major speculative players in Ethereum so horny that during the April and May pre-sale, they funneled 14% of the entire volume of Ether into the DAO's central wallet. Now, because the DAO's underlying code was open source, experts and malicious actors alike were able to pore over it for vulnerabilities, and indeed, vulnerabilities were found. However, because at the end of the day, fleshy humans are the ones actually pushing buttons and making decisions, the actual leadership of the nominally leaderless DAO, horny for money and prestige, decided to launch in late May anyway. 3 weeks later, the DAO's programming was exploited and the attacker was able to transfer 1/3 of the DAO's funds into a holding wallet, about 5% of the entire Ethereum economy, valued at the time around
So remember, the DAO was like the very first major thing on Ethereum. It was like the major use case, and this is when Ethereum had almost zero adoption, especially compared to now. So it's much more decentralized now. There are many more applications running, and the idea of one application controlling 14% of all Ether is kind of bananas right now. So you just have to look at, because I know what he's going to talk about, you just have to look at that in that context, where this was a brand new thing that had just started, and it was the first major application that most people were participating in.
$16 to $17 million. Now, because this threatened the bottom line of capital holders, the Ethereum project as a whole, the entire thing, was almost immediately forked in order to undo the hack and protect the interests of the wealthy. Ethereum Classic,
This wasn't the wealthy. This was literally everyone who believed in Ethereum at that point had invested in this thing, right? And it's not like the wealthiest people, right? Everyone got their money stolen. It's like if Bank of America had a big hack and everyone with a bank account lost their money, wouldn't you want Bank of America to fix that? Now, you can't really do that with crypto because it is much more decentralized. But because it was brand new, this was the first application, etc., they were able to do that, and the community decided that they wanted to do that. It wasn't a handful of small rich people, right? It was a community, and the community voted with their feet. So Ethereum Classic was built, and then Ethereum was built. And why he's bringing this up on the end of a video about crypto, when this was basically a historical story of the infancy of crypto that really has very few similarities to today, is kind of surprising to me.
Of the fork that didn't undo the attack persists to this day, though it's notably less popular despite being demonstrably more principled. Because all the talk about decentralization is a myth. It's just words. At the end of the day, the guys in charge, the guys who built the system...
It's not true, because if the community wanted to not go with the hack, then Ethereum Classic would be the most popular one. If they want to not roll back the hack, I mean. And so the community is voting, and that community is decentralized. No one gets to decide which chain becomes more valuable or more popular, right? With Bitcoin, Bitcoin had a similar dispute. The opposite happened, where the more principled Bitcoin that didn't change at all, basically some people wanted to make a change that would make transactions cheaper, but other people didn't want to alter the fundamental code because they thought the fundamental code of Bitcoin was sacred. In the Bitcoin community, the community voted on the more sacred, unaltered version, right? And that's the version of Bitcoin that we have today. And so these are examples of decentralization where the community is actually voting. And there were some big, powerful figures that were pushing for the other side of Bitcoin and on the other side of Ethereum too. Notably, Vitalik Buterin who's this guy's mentioned multiple times as one of the most powerful people, who actually is one of the most powerful people in crypto, wanted one of these modified versions of Bitcoin to become the next Bitcoin. But the community voted the other way, and that's what happened.
Their interests are still in charge and keep a kill switch in their back pocket. Crypto is barely a decade old, and organizations deemed too big to fail already exist. The whole fiasco laid out the truth from the word go. Calling a DAO a revolutionary structure is smoke and mirrors. It's just voting shares. You might as well call Apple a bold experiment in democracy because a baker's dozen individuals make the decisions instead of just one. Regardless of the future pitfalls, DAOs are also extremely limited. They are, again, just code. While evangelists promise that they can reinvent the social organization, mentally consider all the problems, conflicts, and decision-making that social organizations deal with and ask how many of those even can be solved by code. Some of them can easily be turned into computer programs, automated bookkeeping, payouts, collections, data tracking. Sure, that's all stuff organizations conceptually can make use of. But how do you code for the fact that red just really doesn't get along with blue? The pitch promises organizations bound by unbreakable rules, but how many organizations actually benefit from that level of rigidity? In particular, what happens when the version of the rules enforced by code run up against a complication that the coders didn't consider? What happens if someone with legitimate stake in the DAO starts spamming the organization's internal systems with bad requests? What if not enough people participate in voting? What if the system locks itself up? What if the rules are rigged? What if the system commits a crime? If this technology did see mass adoption, a future time bomb already exists in the fact that very, very few of these systems have factored mortality into the considerations of their structure. Because what if someone with an important token dies is a really easy thing to overlook when you're kind of insulated tech bro who reinvents vending.
I actually know about this startup. But this idea that if someone dies who has control of tokens or keys or whatever, it has been thought about, right? Multi-sig wallets are the solution. And if someone with major voting power died, then the voting power would be distributed amongst all the other people with voting power if they didn't have that set up. So it's kind of a weird point.
Few of these systems have factored mortality into the considerations of their structure. Because what if someone with an important token dies is a really easy thing to overlook when you're kind of insulated tech bro who reinvents vending machines and calls them bodega boxes. Now, all of these hypotheticals are technically addressable. You can build contingency systems that can account for them. But then you need to consider contingencies for those contingencies, because what if someone uses systems intended for dealing with deceased or absentee members to expel people they just don't like? And again, you can only use code to enforce interactions that the programmers make enforceable via the code. Constitution DAO, a hastily set up scheme to bid on one of the few remaining original copies of the US Constitution, already ran aground most of these problems as the project failed to win the auction and is now trying to issue refunds, a thing that the slapdash machine was never intended to do. The reality is that most organizations with any meaningful social complexity, even tiny organizations like video game guilds, are too complex to properly express in code. There's too many contingencies and contingencies for those contingencies and contingencies for those contingencies to account for. So rather than trying to turn social interactions into code, the DAO is marginalized into only handling code-appropriate tasks like bookkeeping, digital signature verification, and on-chain asset management. But that's not a revolutionary new way to organize people.
I think
that's just a productivity
It's
tool.
hard to predict the ways in which a certain system will be successful and be better than the old system, especially at the beginning, right? DAOs weren't even in the public vocabulary less than a year ago. And so the idea that judging everything that's possible by our current understanding is kind of misinformed. There's a really interesting clip of Bill Gates talking about the internet with like Jay Leno or something. And Jay Leno, I wish I could find that. My audio is not really working. But basically he was like, oh, so you can put flyers on the internet? Why don't you just mail something to someone, etc., right? Like the new applications that will be enabled by DAO aren't better versions of existing applications. They'll be new applications entirely, right? And those are extremely hard to predict. So saying that, oh, they wouldn't make these existing applications better is kind of a weird way, not a weird way, but a misguided way of looking at what's possible, right? Because I guarantee you, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, there will be applications of DAOs and crypto in general and NFTs that no one has predicted so far, especially not this guy with like a very cynical mindset.
The DAO can have a process for voting on actions, but the moment the outcome of those actions move off-chain, i.e. into the real world, the DAO program is powerless. The program can't make humans execute the decisions of the group. That's still an analog problem. The whole thing very quickly runs into an incentive wall, where it's just faster and easier to solve problems verbally via abstract trust relationships and promises to the same end results. This is why it's so common for DAOs to not actually have any of the inner machine that would actually make them into what they claim to be. It's easier to just not. Taken as a whole, DAOs aren't some revolutionary new model, they're a tool built onto the side of cryptocurrency that only has meaningful advantages when interacting with cryptocurrency as a tool for speculative trading and managing financial instruments. The rest is just a gimmick, a slow, inflexible tool for executing straw polls. Again, a lot of these boil down to a scheme to minimize liability on the part of the creators. The creators of the Inuyasha token, a meme coin DAO based on nothing except the ephemeral concept of the Inuyasha anime, demonstrated this admirably when they were pressed on the issue of copyright, openly trading on a known brand specifically for clout. Their answer to the question boils down to 1, a failure to understand copyright, and 2, an insistence that it doesn't matter because no one's responsible. The DAO did it. No, humans are liable, just this amorphous, sentient carbon cloud.
You have a really good way you explain it about the copyright issue that everyone's afraid of, because they don't want to invest in a token that's going to be told to like cease and desist or...
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, to clear that up, I think first you have to distinguish between a mark and copy, right? So right now on the website, it's all custom art done by Steven, your friend Steven. So there is no copy. I mean, the only person that can really copyright us right now is Steven. You know? So,
well, what about logo likeness or character likeness?
Yeah, so
some of the worst examples. If you take the worst examples of anything, especially crypto, you'll get a lot of really dumb stuff.
Could become scrutinized. However, we're a decentralized autonomous organization officially, and the token is launched on the Ethereum blockchain. So there's really no going back. I'm just a community member. I'm not an owner. Like there's really no single entity that has ownership over this. So I mean, it's on the blockchain now. There's no going back.
And that bit also just so brilliantly demonstrates the underlying mentality of a lot of these guys. They wanted to use the Inuyasha brand for clout, but they didn't want to ask for permission because they would probably get rejected. So they did it anyway.
Yeah, like this is
so now that it's on chain, it can't be easily taken down. So I guess you just gotta let them do it.
It's on the blockchain now. There's no going back.
Things get funny in that frustrating way when you do come across a DAO that's trying to be legitimate and they tip their hand by revealing that underneath they're legally a co-op or an LLC or some other extant legal entity. Unless your goal is a grift, there's nothing truly revolutionary about their structure or functionality. Li Jin, the co-founder of a bunch of predatory venture capital firms that focus on polishing the image of the gig economy to distract from the ways in which it's eroding labor, has an extended Twitter thread where she tries to pitch DAOs as the future of unions, though her rationale is not only shaky, relying heavily on magical thinking, it's also peppered with inexplicable lies. For example, she champions Yield Guild, a DAO that she describes as a gaming guild comprised of thousands of play-to-earn gamers, an on-ramp that brings more players into play-to-earn gaming. It can represent gamers and lobby game devs for better policies. Its scale also enables the collective to offer benefits and protections, e.g. healthcare, paid time off, that would be infeasible if gamers were operating on their own. This is a tremendous overstatement of what Yield actually is. It's not a union, nor does it function as a union, nor does it have aspirations of functioning as a union. It's not even a DAO, though it does have aspirations of transitioning into being one. It's at best a mildly decentralized cartel that's experimenting with shaking down players with the promise of helping them by gamifying the process of participating in the guild. In practice, it's a Discord server that helps play-to-earn players find sponsorships, pivot from one game to another, and generally bitch about how much their jobs suck. In fact, in response to Legion's tweets, the server residents had this to say.
I've read that through the YGG, DAO members are able to get access to healthcare. Is this true? Is there any more info on this? Anywhere to learn more about what is offered? Or is this still in the works? As a freelancer, I'm always interested to learn about more options.
I actually don't know about that. That would be awesome to get partnered with healthcare. Where did you get that info, though? We haven't heard of any kind about it.
Yeah, I think Lee used it as an example of potential benefits and didn't mean it literally, but nothing of that sort has been discussed.
Yeah, I mean,
now,
you
on
can't
a
just take
level, most
random
DAOs use
cherry
an
picking
administrative
stuff,
system
right?
based off the use and spending
It
of
would be
internal
cool if you
script
could
and
get
governance
healthcare.
tokens. There's a decent amount of variability in how they're used, but basically they function either as proportional voting power, exactly the same as voting shares in a publicly traded company, fiat voting power, where there's no point in possessing more than one, or direct voting power, where tokens are spent to cast votes and more tokens can be spent to cast more votes. Typically, this script can be bought and sold, even on a secondary market, and indeed possession of it is typically a definitional part of membership. Rather than structuring like a union, Yield's overt goal for their DAO is to function as a hedge fund, using the exchange value of their token as a means to raise funds to invest into play-to-earn games, and allowing Yield members to spend their tokens to rent these DAO-owned resources. In fact, Yield is so far removed from the purpose and functionality of a union that the roadmap includes potentially...
The idea that Yield, whatever they're talking about, is a union is kind of weird, but no one's really making that case. Maybe this one person made a Twitter thread, but no one else is really making the case that they're a labor union, right? They are a fund. Some people might work for them in the sense that they might give them these different play-to-earn games, but like I've already said, play-to-earn games are mostly just kind of Ponzi schemes. So it's like it's like picking a random argument that one person is making on the internet somewhere and then turning that into an argument that all of crypto people are making.
Called holographic consensus, which is a futures market where participants gamble on what proposals will or won't be passed using their governance tokens as the stakes. It's amazing if you wanted to build a machine whose sole purpose is to concentrate political power slowly over time. Additionally, many use a proof-of-stake staking system to reward members with additional tokens with no gate on how many tokens any single member can hold. This whole arrangement creates a system where participants with only a few tokens are incentivized to not vote against the interests of highly staked members. Plus, anything you spend limits what you can stake, and thus reduces all future income of tokens, which means even less voting power in the future. Members who possess a disproportionate share of tokens can afford to outspend on the outcome of any vote and still retain a proportional future voting power.
This is all, again, like completely new systems, completely new ideas on voting. Again, I'm going to point to Vitalik's blog. He has some really interesting ideas on how these votings could be better, because some of these random schemes he's mentioning aren't really used in practice. Here, like moving beyond coin voting governance, right? This kind of outlines, I think, if you really want a nuanced take from someone who knows their stuff on these different things, this outlines some of the actual, like they talk about you're in finance, compound, whatever, some of the actual problems with decentralized governance, but also some ideas that we could use to solve them. So like quadratic funding that he mentioned in the video briefly is actually a big one, because it limits the supply of the richest people just being able to have the most votes. It means that people who might have less monetary value invested are able to have a bigger percentage relatively of the total vote.
You end up with high-powered voting blocks and at worst a functional monopoly. The internal discourse of yield is, like all crypto, focused on the price of the DAO script and not its actual functionality within the organization. Rather than creating a more equitable, democratic organization that looks out for the needs of all its members, yield is a scheme that explicitly rewards its highest stakeholders with more power and access. Now, conceptually, you could make a DAO that behaves towards actually useful worker-focused goals, but you could also do that without a DAO, because it's just an organization. The DAO itself...
Fair enough, but there might be some specific advantages that DAOs would have, especially in dealing with blockchain organizations.
Is just a mechanism of an organization, and more often than not, its involvement is little more than tech fetishism. So most actual DAOs don't resemble anything like a flat hierarchy. In fact, the ability to buy and sell voting power and the hierarchy that results is seen as a strict advantage in that it allows emotionally uninvested members to make money and gives them a thing that they can reward people with that will align incentives. And despite the fact that Li Jin is directly involved with yield as the philosopher in residence, yield is neither structured like a labor union, nor does it have ambitions to be one. The point is that thought leaders like Li Jin, who get a lot of social traction by promising that their techno-fetishistic community are solving big societal problems, are liars. They love the pageantry of democracy because it allows them to pretend to be democratic, because they can paint their detractors as being undemocratic. It's all hollow hand-waving and techno-babble to distract from the fact that it's just shareholding. It's the corporatization of everything, the conversion of the entire world into clay.
Again, if you have an extremely cynical take, there's some elements of truth in what he's saying, but the idea of putting that as the motive on these people is just wrong.
Governed by power granted via token possession and enforced by machines that allow humans to wash their hands of the outcomes. At the end of the day, every DAO pretending to be useful is still a forced entry point to some hype-driven meme coin whose existence only benefits its creators and the exchange that sells it.
So this idea of the soulbound NFTs, I have a video on, and I recommend you watch, kind of gets beyond a lot of these problems of the financialization of everything, right? There are ways to reward community members, people who have actually done things, to help them be part of the co-op and have voting power that is not financialized. And these are things that I would imagine that we would see happen in the next few years. It's just everything is so new that people are trying to figure these kinds of things out. I do like the B-roll that they have.
In 2008, the economy functionally collapsed. The basic chain reaction was this. Bankers took mortgages and turned them into something they could gamble on. This created a bubble, and then the bubble popped. When you drill down into it, you realize that the core of the crypto ecosystem, the core of Web3, the core of the NFT marketplace, is a turf war between the wealthy and ultra-wealthy. Techno-fetishists who look at people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, billionaires minted via tech industry doors that have now been shut by market calcification, and are looking for a do-over, looking to synthesize a new market where they can be the one to ascend from a merely wealthy programmer.
This is just not, like, this is where I think this guy is showing kind of the biases that he's coming into this video with, is none of this kind of smacks of truth at all, right? The crypto was not originally created by people that were wealthy or extremely wealthy. And even today, the best parts of crypto, there's an extreme amount of work and development and solutions like remittances, right, that have already been helping real people who are not wealthy. There's been so many of those different use cases that like this idea that it's like a big scam war between super wealthy and wealthy people. It's just weird, and that's kind of his concluding argument for the video. And I just don't see the proof in that.
To a hyper-wealthy industrialist. It's a catfight between the 5% and the 1%. Ultimately, the driving forces underlying this entire movement are economic disparity. The wealthy and tenuously wealthy are looking for a space that they can dominate, where they can be trendsetters and tastemakers and can seemingly invent value through sheer force of will. This is, in my opinion, the blind spot of many casual critics. The fact that tokens representing ape PFPs are useless, yet somehow still expensive, isn't an overlooked glitch in the system. It's half the point. It's a digital extension of inconvenient fashion. It's a flex and a form of myth-making. And that's how it draws in the bottom. People who feel their opportunities shrinking, who see the system closing around them, who have become isolated by social media and a global pandemic, who feel the future getting smaller, people pressured by the casualization of work as jobs are dissolved into the gig economy, and want to believe that escape is just that easy. All you gotta do is bet on the right Discord and you might be airdropped the next new hotness. It could be you, plucked out of the crowd on Rarible and bestowed a 6-figure price by an elusive Emirati music producer. Get a bake in your wallet, hodl like a good diamond hands, and enjoy that yield. All you need is $5,000 in seed money and you can buy a Farmer's World milk cow. And if you milk that cow every 4 hours day and night for 2 weeks, why there's all your money back right there. And now it's pure profit, minus, naturally, the overhead.
Yeah, so what he just said is actually so true. Like, a lot of people think that crypto is their ticket out, right? And there are so many crypto scams that prey on these people. And again, in the real world, you have things like lotteries, scratch-offs. Who are the people buying scratch-off lottery tickets, right? Not the people in the highest income brackets. It's preying on the people who are who have financial insecurity and dream of being financially secure. And these scams and grifts need to get rid of. I think we really do need some better education. I think this video is actually good for the world, in the sense that it might convince a lot of people who otherwise might fall for these scams to avoid them as a whole. But if you really are interested in crypto and you want to see what the future will be like and see that there are some new applications that can actually bring good to the world, right? Then you have to dive deeper than these scammy discords and the NFTs, etc.
Head of all the wax you needed to stake, the barn you needed to buy and build, the barley you needed to purchase and grow, the food you needed to buy to refill, the energy you needed to milk the cow, build the barn and grow the barley, plus you actually need to cash out, which isn't getting paid, it's quitting. This is your chance to stick it
so
to
he's
Wall
talking
Street
about
and the venture capitalists, as long as you pay no attention to the VCs behind the curtain. The line can only go up. It's a movement driven in no small part by rage, by people who looked at 2008, who looked at the system as it exists, but concluded that the problems with capitalism were that it didn't provide enough opportunities to be the boot.
Just not true.
And that's the pitch. Buy in now, buy in early, and you could be the high-tech future boot. Our systems are breaking or broken, straining under neglect and sabotage, and our leaders seem at best complacent, willing to coast out the collapse. We need something better, but a system that turns everyone into petty digital landlords, that distills all interaction into transaction, that determines the value of something by how sellable it is and whether or not it can be gambled on as a fractional token sold via micro-auction. That's not it. A different system does not inherently mean a better system. We replace bad systems with worse ones all the time.
This
we
is
replace a bad
actually
system of work.
True. This is true. But I think the ideal for crypto would be to replace the bad systems with the ones that actually can be better, right? And if someone creates a crypto system that's worse, hopefully it might like get popular briefly as people hype it up, but eventually it'll die, just like the internet, like the first internet applications that were actually hype and made things worse.
American bosses with a terrible system of apps, gigs, and on-demand labor. So it's not just that I oppose NFTs because the foremost of them are aesthetically vacuous representations of the dead inner lives of the tech and finance bros behind them, it's that they represent the vanguard of a worse system. The whole thing, from OpenSea fantasies for starving artists to the buy-in for pay-to-earn games, it's the same hollow, exploitative pitch as MLMs. It's Amway, but everywhere you look, people are wearing ugly-ass ape cartoons.
So it was a really interesting video. And I think that a lot of the critiques, I think using NFTs as a spearhead to critique crypto as a whole is smart if you want to paint a really bad picture of crypto as a whole. Because scams, MLM schemes, Amway, all these things, completely true, are endemic in crypto. They're all over the place. And actually, I think probably more than 50% of crypto projects that spring up are these kinds of scams. But this guy really did a poor job of covering the things that were not part of these scams, and did a really good job of critiquing. So a lot of the critiques I agree with as part of the worst part of crypto, but there are some really good things. If you want to know some of the good things, check out some of my other videos. I'd specifically recommend the one on soulbound NFTs that talks about some of the promising features that we could have with crypto. I'd read this article on TechCrunch. I'd check out Vitalik Buterin's the article on the remittances. Check out Vitalik Buterin's blog, just to get the other side of the story. But as far as like the negative points, I think he actually covered them pretty well. Also, shout out to some of my most dedicated subscribers like Juan and Bryce. I have 2 viewers right now, and it might be you two, or maybe my parents, or my sister. So love you guys, and thanks for tuning in. Signing off.